Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Nichola Sweeney. The most terrible cases in the history of forensics are murders that are not motivated by anything at all. Nichola Sweeney was born 6 weeks premature in a hospital in the large city of Cork, Ireland, in October 1981. After her birth, both the baby and her mother were forced to spend 2 weeks in intensive care, but the doctors managed to save her life and avoid developmental problems associated with prematurity. Despite the accompanying challenges, the birth of a girl became a great joy for her parents. John and his wife, Josephine Sweeney, had wanted to have a child for a long time. However, they were haunted by failures, including 3 miscarriages that followed one after another. Young parents almost despaired, so the birth of their daughter became a real miracle, followed by a bright streak in their lives. 3 years after the birth of their daughter, the family was expecting another addition, a son named Sean. Finally, mother and father felt complete happiness. After all, this is what the ideal family looked like in the imagination of them. Meanwhile, the entire family moved to London due to the development of the parents' business. At that time, Nichola was 1 year old. For the next 15 years, Nichola and her parents regularly visited Ireland at least once a year to meet with loved ones. They continued to live in England because London offered more prospects and better earnings. Most often, they visited her grandparents in Ireland. It was there that Nichola developed a true love for nature. When visiting the countryside, she enjoyed interacting with animals, but most of all, she liked horses. It is not surprising that, against this background, she became a vegetarian. At a slightly older age, she began to work with horses in London. She loved to ride these majestic animals and attended the local church when she started going to primary school. There, she also developed a love for music and art. Nichola became a member of the church choir and participated in Irish dances at the local parish. Nichola was generally very proud of her roots and adored her native country of Ireland. Against this background, she constantly asked her parents to move back with her. However, her father and mother's business was actively developing, so they could not give up their favorite pursuit. Instead of moving back, they put the house in Ireland up for sale. It was a great family home, an almost century-old building located on a hillside overlooking the ocean, surrounded by greenery in a very picturesque area. At first, Nichola was upset, fearing that she would never see this place again. However, circumstances changed, and the parents' business began to gain momentum, providing enough funds for more frequent trips to Ireland. In addition, the mother and father did not want to lose touch with their homeland, so they refused to sell the property. At the age of 16, Nichola, along with her brother and parents, moved back for a while to that very house, which they had managed to save. This was necessary because, during this period, her mother and father had a third child, a boy named Christopher. They wanted to raise the baby in a calmer environment. In 1997, 16-year-old Nichola began attending a school located in the center of Cork. Due to the move, she had to change educational institutions again. However, she fit in well with new groups. A little later, Nichola met Sinéad O'Leary, who was very similar to her in many ways, even sharing the story of her parents moving to London. Sinead's mother and father had also decided to return to Ireland. In 1998, just a year after Nichola's family moved back, the teenagers immediately became close. Their similar backgrounds and even appearances facilitated this bond. Both girls had a strong London accent, which made them stand out among the local teenagers. They were also quite shy, but Nichola supported Sinead, who entered this school a year later and faced great difficulties communicating with her peers. The girl did not fit into the team easily, and Nichola understood her struggles. She accepted Sinead as a kindred spirit. Their friendship began when Nichola suggested going to the cinema with a group of her friends during a break. The girls stepped outside to talk and ended up not returning for the rest of the film because they realized their similarities and became best friends. Nichola really valued this relationship. In the pages of her diary, Sinead wrote that Nichola had become a second family where she could behave naturally and be herself. Sinead had a tendency to take everything to heart, while her friend calmed her down. This was especially noticeable during exams. Sinéad was very worried, but next to Nichola, she felt calmer, as if she were with an older sister. Nichola evoked strong feelings in many who knew her well. She had an excellent relationship with her brother Sean. The teenagers supported each other, especially when their parents were forced to travel to London for work. Nichola usually stayed behind, as her parents took Christopher with them, believing he was too young to be left in Ireland under the care of teenagers. Most of the time, their mother babysat while working part-time as a waitress at a local cafe in the city's shopping centre. Sinéad attended another university and was frequently traveling to Dublin. Consequently, the girls began to see each other less often, but they maintained warm relations. Every time the friends were together, they simply talked and enjoyed each other's company, often spending the night and having fun. On the evening of Saturday, April 27, 2002, Sinéad visited her friend. It was an ordinary day for them, as the students planned to spend the weekend together, hanging out in the city with friends. When Nichola turned 20 years old, she returned home from her part-time job to prepare for an evening outing to the city center. Her colleagues said goodbye to her that evening, unaware that it would be the last time they would see her alive. Nichola left the cafe at 7 p.m., and her best friend was already waiting for her near the house where she was preparing dinner. They discussed their upcoming exams. Their parents were in London and were not planning to return for another week. As usual, their mother and father had taken their younger brother with them. Sean was still working at the hotel, where he served as an administrator. Before going home, he called his mother and spoke for about 10 minutes, promising to call again later that evening. After 8 p.m., all three of them, Nichola, Sinéad, and Sean, were at the family home having dinner. It seemed like an ordinary evening for the young people. Nothing foreshadowed the horrific events that would follow this gathering. Meanwhile, in a pub not far from the family home, three young men were unwinding: Barry Dolan, Cy McCarthy, and Peter Whalen. The latter was well known to law enforcement agencies due to his involvement in criminal activity. Peter was respected by no one, and everyone, friends included, feared his unpredictability. He had a criminal history, having been implicated in a robbery on Christmas Eve 2001. He had crashed a private party without an invitation, was thrown out, and returned to attack several attendees with a glass bottle, injuring a number of people, although fortunately, no one sustained serious injuries. All the victims lived near the Sweeney family, and while Nichola knew them, she did not associate with them. Additionally, their dangerous neighbor skillfully concealed his criminal dealings, so the heroine of the story generally viewed them with indifference. On that April evening, in the pub, the group of young men began to insult others present. Peter behaved threateningly, as if he were trying to provoke a fight. The bartender refused to serve him, hoping the group would leave the establishment. Peter pretended to agree, but it was a ruse. As soon as the bartender turned away, he jumped over the counter and grabbed a heavy ceramic ashtray. He intended to smash it on the bartender's head, but one of the patrons shouted in time. The man managed to dodge a direct blow, and the ashtray barely missed, causing only minor injuries to him. Following this, the police were called. Law enforcement officers checked the group of young people, who were all sober and showed no signs of injury. Peter and his companions were asked to leave. Frustrated, all three headed to Barry's house. However, his mother refused to let Peter and Cy stay overnight. Consequently, Peter decided to walk his girlfriend home. As they walked, she noticed how angry he was. He could barely contain his rage and walked a few steps ahead, fists clenched. Peter escorted his girlfriend home, but he still struggled to manage his anger. He felt humiliated for being thrown out of the bar and was unable to take revenge on the bartender. Additionally, the mother of his friend had refused to let him into the house, which insulted him further. In the end, filled with frustration, Peter headed home. However, he did not plan to stay there for long. Quietly, he took 2 kitchen knives. His mother was worried about why he was late. Peter insisted that he had been attacked at the bar, so he spent a lot of time talking to the police. After that, he silently left the house without telling anyone where he was going. He headed towards Sweeney's house, which was surrounded by a high fence, behind which was a garden. This did not stop Peter. He easily climbed over the fence and found himself in the courtyard. He walked along the driveway and tried to open the front door of the house. However, it was locked. Inside, two girls were having dinner. Nichola and Sinéad and her friend were planning to go downtown after dinner. They were watching a movie but then decided to start getting ready to meet friends. At the moment when Peter entered the house through the window, all three were distractedly discussing their plans for the evening, completely oblivious to the impending danger. Meanwhile, Sean had decided to attend the 40th birthday party of his best friend's mother, which was taking place on the other side of town. He asked a friend for a ride to the event, but he arrived too early. Sean offered his sister and her girlfriend a ride to the center, but they weren't ready yet and refused. Instead, Nichola had already arranged for transport and didn't want to let him down. At 10:30 p.m., before leaving, Sean called his mother again, but she couldn't answer because she was trying to put the capricious Christopher to bed. Because of this, the woman missed the opportunity to hear her daughter's voice for the last time in her life. Sean left, leaving the two girls in the house. Sinéad and Nichola were sitting on the bed in the bedroom, doing the final touches to their makeup. Nichola was facing the corridor while her friend sat closer to the door, but with her back to her. Unexpectedly, Nichola saw a dark figure appear on the stairs. The uninvited guest was silent, and Nichola couldn't understand who it was. She called out to the dark figure, thinking it was her brother Sean playing an unsuccessful joke, but the shadow didn't answer and began to move slowly toward the open door. When the stranger stepped into the light, Nichola realized it was Peter, her neighbor. He didn't immediately take out the knives but silently attacked Sinéad. He delivered the first blow, hitting her several times with his hands and feet. The girl was disoriented and fell to the floor, but the villain continued to beat her before pulling out one of the knives and continuing the assault with a deadly weapon. At this point, she was paralyzed with horror and simply begged Peter to stop. Additionally, he acted quickly, and Nichola barely had time to gather her thoughts to help her friend. But the criminal wasn't done. Sinéad suffered more than a dozen knife wounds while lying on the floor, desperately resisting. Peter stood over her, using his weight to prevent the girls from screaming or crying, while the attacker relentlessly struck blow after blow. Finally, distracted from his first victim, he looked at Nichola and took out a second knife, screaming as he rushed at her. At that moment, Nichola regained her senses. She ran in the hope of reaching the phone or getting outside to call for help. In her attempt to escape from the attacker, she received 11 stab wounds. The killer blocked her exit from the room, leaving her with only one escape path through the open window. Nichola, in despair, tried to get out. At that moment, Peter caught up with her, stabbing her in the heart before continuing the attack. Surprisingly, Sinéad was still alive despite the severe injuries. She was bleeding and slipping away from the attacker. This horrifying scene unfolded in pitch darkness. Later, the investigation revealed that, upon entering the house, the attacker had turned off all the lights he could until he was finally noticed while going down the stairs. Only the bedroom remained illuminated, covered in blood. The criminal again looked for his other victim but was unable to find her. He ultimately decided that she was already dead. Wandering around the second floor, he made ominous sounds, which Sinéad heard and prayed would not be directed toward her. Eventually, the criminal lost interest in his victims and left the house. As soon as she heard this, Sinéad mustered her courage and left the locked bathroom. First, she went to Nichola, who was lying next to the window in a pool of blood, having lost consciousness. Sinéad was very weak and could barely stand, but she managed to grab her mobile phone to call emergency services, then her father. She knew he would arrive at the house in a few minutes since he lived nearby. Unfortunately, 20-year-old Nichola died from her wounds in the arms of her friend just a couple of minutes later. Sinéad's father arrived immediately and supported his daughter while trying to provide first aid to both of them. Despite the efforts of the first responders, Nichola lost consciousness due to her injuries. Meanwhile, in the Sweeney house, police and medical teams were working hard. Peter returned to his home to see the result of his actions. Noticing the police and ambulance, he thought both girls were dead. After that, Peter ran to his uncle and pretended to be one of the concerned neighbors gathering near the house. Peter approached with the others and saw Sinéad being carried out on a stretcher. Sinéad was badly injured but alive. She gave a detailed description of her attacker, and the police interrogated her, fearing she could lose consciousness again or even die. This all happened around midnight. A patrolman recognized Peter, as he matched the description provided by the survivor. When the policeman approached him and voiced his suspicions, Peter immediately became aggressive, threatening the officer, claiming he was dangerous. It was decided to detain him for questioning at the station. According to Irish law, detectives are not allowed to deny a suspect sleep, so Peter Whelan had the opportunity to rest and also contemplate what had happened until morning. This gave him precious time to try to formulate a justification for his actions, but he failed to come up with a plausible lie. Eventually, he confessed to the attack, claiming that he was driven by voices in his head, blaming his actions on a long-standing mental illness. However, forensic experts were surprised to find nothing unusual in Peter's blood. There were no traces of alcohol or banned substance, which was confirmed by toxicological tests. Additionally, there were no documented cases of mental illness in his history, and he was not registered with any relevant clinic. Experts concluded that he was completely healthy. The question remained, what could have motivated a young man to attack two girls who had done nothing to him? Peter was charged with 2 counts of murder of Nichola and attempted murder of Sinéad, after which he was jailed pending the hearing. Detectives gathered all possible information to find a motive. Nichola was buried in County Kerry, near the place of her birth, which her mother always associated with the happiest moments of her life. Meanwhile, the doctors managed to pull Sinéad back from the brink, but her face was covered with scars from the attack. The road to her physical and mental recovery would be long. On October 31, 2002, a hearing was scheduled for the case of murder and attempted murder. The victim's family expected it to be a straightforward hearing, with the killer separated from others and the families placed in different areas of the courtroom, as is typical. However, the case drew such a large crowd that the courtroom was completely packed, with no free seats left, and some people were forced to stand. Families of both the victims and the accused sat shoulder to shoulder, creating a chaotic atmosphere. The trial commenced and was expected to be short since Peter Whelan had confessed. It was clear that he showed no remorse, even making cruel jokes about Nichola and Sinéad during the hearing. A major inconvenience for Nichola's family was the judge's decision to forbid them from reading their statements to the killer, denying them the opportunity to express their thoughts about the criminal. During a break, the seats of the victim's family were taken by the relatives of the defendant, and they had to move as there was no room for Nichola's brother. When the killer was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, his father stood up and patted his son on the shoulder in a show of support, which appeared shockingly cynical to the families of Nichola and Sinéad. Ultimately, Peter Whelan was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attacking Sinéad, in addition to the life sentence for Nichola's murder. In his sentencing, the judge emphasized that this crime was one of the most brutal in the history of Ireland. What was particularly shocking was the complete absence of a motive. Peter claimed he acted out of uncontrollable anger for perceived slights and decided to punish 2 innocent girls who had done nothing to him. Just a month after starting his prison sentence, the case continued to draw national attention. Peter filed an appeal, but all his appeals were ultimately rejected. Throughout his imprisonment, he filed 9 appeals and even tried to reach the Supreme Court. Each of these events was accompanied by hearings, to which the family of Nichola and Sinéad were forced to attend. Peter seemed determined to force them to relive the circumstances of the attack again and again. They could not ignore these court summons because they did not want to give this monster even the slightest chance to achieve a mitigated sentence. Against the backdrop of Peter's impudent behavior, numerous questions arose about the legal system. Under Irish law, the appeal fee and the provision of a lawyer from the state are paid for by taxpayers. Hundreds of thousands of euros were spent on this. In fact, the victims of the attacker were paying for him to get a chance at freedom to continue his crimes. Naturally, many people thought this was unfair, especially the families of Nichola and Sinéad, who felt the imperfections of justice. Peter's defenders managed to achieve a change in the order of serving his sentences, meaning that he first had to serve 15 years for the attempted murder before the life sentence would begin. To the surprise of the Sweeney and O'Leary families, after 17 years of imprisonment, the criminal was eligible for temporary release. He was repeatedly taken from prison to Cork, where he spent his time quite legally. Moreover, the correctional system did not even warn the families of the victims that the most dangerous criminal was at large next to them. It became known that Sinéad was never able to fully rehabilitate herself after the attack. Even after 10 years, she still had an overwhelming fear of the dark and suffered from nightmares. To cope, she got a German Shepherd, which helped her feel at least a little calmer. The families of the victims repeatedly contacted the Irish correctional system, trying to get at least some comments about Peter, but all requests were ignored. It was believed that the temporary release was completely legal according to the parole board. Peter had almost completely served his 15-year sentence, although in fact, he completed only 11 years for attempted murder and received parole as a model prisoner, beginning his life sentence only 6 years later. Peter was first released in 2018 on compassionate grounds due to the death of his mother, Mary. He was granted temporary release to say goodbye to her. However, it seemed that the law enforcement system showed no compassion for the parents of Nichola or her friend, who miraculously survived the massacre. Subsequent temporary releases were based on recommendations from the parole board as part of the rehabilitation program for criminals of the Supreme Court, which is not mandated by law. These recommendations continue to cause controversy in Ireland. There are often cases when prisoners serving long sentences are given opportunities for release, but this happens extremely rarely in the early stages of life sentences. According to the Commission's comments, each case of temporary release is considered individually. In Peter's case, he was deemed a model prisoner. He initially spent 2 years in Cork prison, after which he was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility for 13 years. In 2018, he was transferred again, this time to a prison called Wakefield, which is considered to have a less severe regime. However, in 2019, the government confirmed that Rochestown murderer Peter Whelan would remain in custody until at least 2025 under the new Pardons Act. Under the Act, prisoners sentenced to life will be eligible to apply for parole after serving 12 years of their life sentence. This does not mean, of course, that they will be eligible for parole at that point. The department also confirmed that the Act will apply to both new and retroactive sentences. The new 12-year eligibility threshold will apply to prisoners sentenced to life regardless of whether the sentence was imposed before or after the Act came into force. The announcement was welcomed by the families of Whelan's victims. The Sweeney and O'Leary families are now calling on the minister to act quickly, so it can take effect before Whelan's next parole hearing, currently scheduled for November 2020. When Sinéad first learned that the killer had the right to temporary release and was periodically walking the streets of her hometown, she immediately declared that this monster would definitely kill again and therefore should not be released into society, even for a short time. She also stated that if he was released, she would be forced to leave her hometown because she simply wouldn't be able to feel safe. Now, they are trying to ensure that Peter remains behind bars and is unable to return to his hometown, where the families of Sinéad and Nichola live. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of the Watts family. Sian Rozusek, 34, and her husband, Christopher, 33, have 2 daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. Both are from North Carolina and met on Facebook. Initially, she did not accept her proposal. When Shannon faced difficulties in her life, Christopher supported her, and their relationship began to grow rapidly from that point. They relocated to Frederick, Colorado, where they got married on November 3, 2012, and decided to start a family despite facing challenges. At that time, Shannon was informed that she might not be able to have children due to her lupus diagnosis, an autoimmune disease. Nevertheless, Christopher reassured her of his unwavering support and encouraged her to accept his marriage proposal. Despite her health issues, Shannon joyfully became a mother and gave birth to 2 beloved daughters, whom she described as amazing and spirited. Shannon then discovered she was pregnant with a baby boy. This news filled her with excitement, knowing how Christopher had always dreamed of having a son. She was thrilled to fulfill his wish and expand their family, and her daughters were also excited about welcoming a new sibling. They even chose a name for the baby, Nico. Shannon was very active on social media, frequently posting updates about her life on Instagram. She shared videos about herself and her children, showcasing family moments and engaging with various online communities. To outsiders, it appeared that the family led a perfect life. Christopher worked for a large oil and natural gas company, while Shannon previously worked in human resources at a children's hospital. However, her husband's income was not sufficient to cover their living expenses and the mortgage on their large 5-bedroom home with a 3-car garage. As a result, they filed for bankruptcy in 2015 due to high mortgage payments, health insurance costs, and medical expenses. Soon after, Shannon started a new job at an online supplement company. She loved the job because it offered many benefits. She could spend all day with her children and have quality time with them, while also having the opportunity to travel for work with a high salary, which suited her very well. On June 16, 2018, she shared a heartfelt post on social media about her life, expressing her happiness and satisfaction with her new job. In her post, she mentioned that she loved the lifestyle that allowed her to live fully and cherish every moment with her family. Shannon often expressed her happiness and painted a picture of a thriving, successful, and friendly family on social media. During a live session, she mentioned that she had many upcoming plans and trips. From June 22nd to 26th, she was scheduled to travel to San Diego with Christopher. After that trip, she planned to take their daughters to North Carolina to visit relatives, returning home on August 7th. She was also looking forward to a short business trip for work that would last just a couple of nights. She shared her plans and cheerful posts on social media. After attending a seminar in Arizona, she returned home on August 13, 2018. Her close friend, Nichola Atkinson, picked her up from the airport and dropped her off around 2 a.m. This was the last time anyone saw Shannon alive. A friend later noted that Shannon appeared very tired and exhausted, as if she hadn't been sleeping well, but she seemed determined. It looked like she was preparing for something at home, where her husband Christopher and their 2 daughters were waiting for her. On August 13th, Shannon had an appointment for a checkup regarding her 3rd pregnancy, which was in its 15th week. The doctor's visit was necessary to ensure that everything was progressing normally. However, when she failed to arrive for her 10 a.m. appointment and missed a business meeting, her friend Nichola became concerned. Nichola found it unusual that Shannon wasn't answering her phone or responding to text messages, especially since Shannon typically took her communications seriously because of her job and her responsibilities as a mother. Worried about Shannon, Nichola tried to call her throughout the day. When that didn't work, Nichola decided to check on her at her house. Upon arriving, Nichola noticed her car in the driveway and knocked on the door, but no one responded. Next, Nichola called her husband, Christopher, who was at work, and then contacted the police. The police arrived at 1:40 p.m. and attempted to get a response by knocking on the door, but when that failed, the officer contacted Christopher and suggested he come to help check the house. When Christopher arrived, he entered the house with a police officer. They found Shannon's mobile phone on the sofa, between the pillows, while in the kitchen, her handbag, wallet, and keys were located. A suitcase filled with belongings was near the stairs. All of Shannon's personal items, including her daughter's medicine, were inside the house, indicating that she had not left. Her car was parked as usual, and the child's seats were still in place. Only Shannon and her daughters, Bella and Celeste, were the ones missing. In missing persons investigations, authorities typically start by questioning the partner or spouse of the missing individual, asking if they have noticed anything unusual, have any information, when they last saw them, or if there was any conflict. This case followed the same protocol, and Christopher was asked such questions. He informed the police that Shannon returned home around 2 a.m., and during an emotional conversation, he told her he wanted a divorce. Both were upset and crying. Afterwards, he went to work. He never saw Shannon again. Surveillance footage from a nearby house confirmed that he left at 5:15 a.m., and no one else exited the house after that, prompting the police to call in a detective. Christopher informed the detective that the timeline of the incident began when Shannon returned home at 1:48 a.m. They had a conversation at 4 a.m., and he left for work at 5:15 a.m. Initially, he claimed that he and his wife had an emotional discussion upon her arrival, which was a minor inconsistency in his story. Over the next 2 days, Christopher gave several interviews to the media about the disappearance of his wife and children, trying to present himself as a genuinely worried father. He stated that his children were his life and that their smiles lit up his world, expressing his sorrow over their absence. That image, however, didn't last long. On August 15, 2018, Christopher was arrested on 3 counts of first-degree murder. He had previously failed a lie detector test, and during a later interrogation, he confessed to killing his wife, but denied any involvement in their daughter's death. Investigators also examined the neighbor's video footage, which showed Christopher loading a large, heavy object wrapped in a sheet into his car at 5:30 a.m. on August 13. Notably, there was no video evidence of Shannon leaving the house. This lack of footage led the police to conclude that Christopher was loading the bodies of Shannon and their daughters into the vehicle. Before he fully confessed, he requested to see his father. When his father entered the interrogation room, he shared his account of the incident, shocking everyone present, as no one anticipated what he would say. Christopher shared that he and Shannon had a deeply emotional conversation in which he acknowledged their marriage was failing. Just before leaving for work, he glanced at the baby monitor and saw Shannon attempting to strangle their daughter Celeste by the crib. He immediately rushed to the room and found Bella bruised and, unfortunately, dead. Witnessing Shannon harm their children drove Christopher into a fury, and in a fit of rage, he strangled his wife in a similar manner. Christopher mentioned that after discussing divorce, Shannon threatened that he would never see their daughters again, seemingly indicating she was about to act on her intentions. Following his confession, Christopher revealed to the authorities where he had hidden the bodies, guiding them to the site near his workplace, where oil tanks were located. Shannon was buried in a shallow grave about 40 miles from their home, while their daughter was placed in the oil tanks, submerged in crude oil. He explained that the tragedy arose because he and his wife had drifted apart, focusing on their children but neglecting their relationship. However, a significant detail later emerged that changed the narrative. Christopher had been having an affair with a woman named Nichola Sweeney, which began while Shannon and their daughter were visiting relatives in North Carolina. Nichola was a contractor at Christopher's workplace, where they met and quickly entered into a relationship. He told her that he and Shannon had mutually agreed to divorce and mentioned that they had 2 daughters, but he did not disclose that Shannon was pregnant with their 3rd child. Later, Nichola mentioned that if she had known about the pregnancy, she would never have spent time with Christopher. Although their relationship was new, it progressed quickly, and Nichola was already planning to marry him. The day before Shannon and her daughter went missing, Nichola had been shopping for a wedding dress. When Shannon and the kids' disappearance captured public attention, Nichola went to the police to disclose her affair with Christopher. She revealed that she had visited Christopher's family home twice at the beginning of their relationship, but her visits were brief. Nichola also believed that financial issues were a motive behind Christopher's actions. She recounted that on the night Shannon was reported missing, she called Christopher and found him in bed, getting ready to sleep. He claimed that his wife was missing, likely because she intended to leave him and take the kids with her. Nichola found it odd that he could sleep calmly under such circumstances. Realizing something was definitely amiss, Nichola decided to inform the police and cooperated fully with their investigation. The authorities suspected Nichola's involvement in the murders, but they lacked evidence to support their claims. It later emerged that Christopher and Shannon had experienced disagreements and emotional distance in recent months, leading Shannon to take an extended vacation with their children to reflect and give her husband space to think. However, despite her cheerful social media posts, her messages to Christopher revealed that their relationship was strained. On August 5, 2018, Shannon wrote to Christopher that she was trying to give him space, but while he was working, he was living like a bachelor. She mentioned that she was at home with their 3rd child, managing their 2 other kids every day, working, and trying to earn money. She said it was hard for him to even send a text saying that he loved her and missed her, and she kept checking her phone, hoping to hear from him. In her letter, she expressed her disbelief that it had been 8 years since they started dating and mentioned that they now had 3 kids. She indicated that they needed to talk. The letter conveyed her feelings of missing him and loving him, emphasizing the importance of working on their marriage. However, she also mentioned that if their feelings for each other didn't align, it would be necessary to discuss it. Shannon remarked that she couldn't understand how someone could fall out of love during the 5 weeks she had been away. Christopher stated that he loved Shannon and was with her not just for the children, but he struggled to understand his own feelings. Shannon later confided in a friend that their relationship had faced many challenges and that they had become incompatible, particularly because Christopher refused to attend couples counseling. During the investigation, prosecutors realized that Christopher desired a new romantic relationship and a fresh start, wanting to escape the burdens of family life and the tensions in his marriage. He was even looking for a new apartment with Nichola. After committing the crime, Christopher was not only focused on finding a new apartment but also hurriedly listed his house for sale. On August 21, 2018, Christopher was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts related to the murder of a child under 12, 1 count of illegal termination of pregnancy, and 3 counts of abuse of a corpse. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to all charges in 2018. On November 19, he was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, receiving an additional 48 years for illegal termination of pregnancy and 36 years for abuse of a corpse. 2 months after the verdict was announced, Christopher disclosed the truth about the incident. He explained that he had not loved Shannon for a long time but was afraid to leave her because he thought she would take their daughters. He met Nichola at work and was the first to approach her, claiming that he was already in the process of divorcing his wife and did not wear a wedding ring. During an argument, Christopher strangled Shannon in their bedroom. The autopsy indicated that she had suffered for a while, suggesting that she had tried to fight back. At that moment, their older daughter, Bella, walked in and asked what was happening. Christopher told her that her mother was sick and needed to rest. He then wrapped Shannon's body in a sheet and carried it to the car. When their daughter began to cry, scared and confused, Christopher lost control and strangled both of them, Celeste with her own blanket and Bella with his hands. He heard Bella's last words, "Dad, no," as she fought for her life. Christopher then disposed of the bodies by taking them to the oil site where he worked, burying Shannon and throwing his daughter's bodies into oil tanks. After the verdict, Christopher Watts was sent to state prison but was later transferred for safety reasons to a maximum security facility in Wisconsin, where he will spend the rest of his life. The judge who sentenced Christopher described the murders as some of the most inhumane and cruel acts that he had ever encountered in his career. Shannon's father labeled Christopher a heartless monster and expressed a wish that the souls of his daughters haunt Christopher at night. He emphasized that Christopher deserves to suffer. Jonathan Candy was a 42-year-old engineer working with the Oklahoma City basketball team. He focused on equipment maintenance and had developed his career over many years, first in sports and then in technical fields, which allowed him to support his family comfortably. In 2024, he had been married for 10 years to his wife, Lindsay Candy, who was 39. They lived in Yukon, Oklahoma, a small, quiet suburb with a population of over 20,000. They had 4 children, Dylan, 18, Ethan, 14, Lucas, 12, and their youngest child, who was just 10. The identity of the 10-year-old was kept private due to his young age and vulnerability. In the spring of 2024, this 10-year-old boy is about to experience a tragic event, an event that will greatly impact his life and those around him. The Candy family was viewed as a model American family, friendly and tight-knit. They have built a strong influence in the community, raising their children in one of the safest and most beautiful suburbs of the state. At that time, Ethan and Lucas were in school, in the 9th and 6th grades, respectively. Meanwhile, Dylan had graduated from high school in 2023 and was preparing for adulthood. He planned to attend college and had found a job to save money while applying to various schools. The Candy family did not have any mental health issues. Their upbringing was stable and uneventful. There were no instances of running away from home, and the parents maintained a peaceful household, allowing their children the freedom to make choices. This environment contributed to a thriving atmosphere at home, where the kids grew up feeling strong, sociable, and loved. They were always supportive of each other and even appeared in a local bakery advertisement, where they were regular customers and shared their favorite meals. Jonathan and Lindsay worked hard to help their children prepare for the future and lead fulfilling lives. However, behind this seemingly happy facade, a terrible situation is unfolding that will create a nightmare on Willow Street. On the evening of April 21, 2024, a Sunday, the whole family gathered at home. The older children spent time with their friends but returned home early to prepare for school the next day and to go to bed on time. Everything seemed normal for the Candy family, and no one anticipated the shocking incident that was about to occur. After dinner, Jonathan went to bed, and each child settled into their own room on the second floor. Later that night, the children overheard Jonathan and Lindsay arguing in the living room on the first floor. Although the specifics of their argument were unclear, it escalated dangerously. Despite the tension, everyone remained calm and went to bed. The youngest boy, whose fan was running, could hardly hear the commotion below. Meanwhile, a tragedy unfolded on the first floor that resulted in the deaths of 5 family members. But what exactly happened, and who was responsible for this horrific crime? In conversations with the only surviving family member, more details emerged after the incident. The fire alarm went off, which forensic experts determined was caused by gunpowder fumes from the shooting. The noise startled the youngest child, who didn't understand what was happening or why the alarm was sounding. Curious, he left his room to investigate, completely unprepared for the horrific scene he was about to encounter. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed that the doors to his brother's rooms were open. Ordinarily, this might have seemed odd, but he thought everyone had gotten up due to the alarm. He made his way downstairs to the first floor and noticed a light on. He called out for his parents but received no answer. He then called his brothers, but all he got was the continuous beeping of the warning. Hoping to find answers, the boy went to the living room. The first thing he saw was blood splattered on the walls and furniture. In the center of the room lay his mother and father in large pools of blood. His father was sprawled on top of his mother, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. The boy was terrified and in shock. He rushed to his father, trying to wake him up, not fully grasping what had happened. He saw the bullet holes and felt his parents grow cold, but he refused to believe they were dead. Despite shaking his father repeatedly, there were no signs of life. His mother did not respond either. In a moment of desperation, he called out for his brothers, still unaware that he was the only survivor. Overwhelmed with grief, he cried and collapsed onto his parents' lifeless bodies. He then walked through his brother's room and saw an identical, horrifying scene. Blood was everywhere, and there were no signs of life. Eventually, he realized he needed to call for help. Summoning his courage, he reached out to a rescue worker and requested assistance. This initiated a horrifying sequence of incidents that would lead to a deeper investigation into this unimaginable tragedy. When law enforcement and paramedics arrived, they quickly realized that nothing could be done. The family had been dead for several hours, as indicated by the rigor mortis and the state of the blood on the floor. The parents and older brothers were declared dead at the scene, and the house was cordoned off for investigation. Forensic experts and detectives, horrified, began to reconstruct the scene of the brutal massacre. The idea of an outsider attacking the family was quickly dismissed, as there were no signs of forced entry or any outsiders present. This raised concerns that the murders had been committed by a family member. At some point, the 10-year-old boy was found to be covered in blood, leading police to consider whether he might have been involved. However, his behavior, condition, age, and the evidence quickly eliminated any doubt. There were no traces of gunpowder on his hands, and no fingerprints on the weapon. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the windows and doors and found no signs of staging. Everything in the house was intact, with no valuables disturbed or missing. They reviewed street surveillance footage and only saw the family members returning from the store that evening. No one else had entered or left the house before the police's arrival. The boy mentioned hearing his parents scream before he fell asleep. Since the weapon was found next to the body of Jonathan, the boy's father, it was clear that the father had committed a crime against his family before harming himself. As investigators analyzed the crime scene, it became evident how ruthless and cold-blooded 42-year-old Jonathan had been. The motive behind his actions remained unclear. The police could not determine the cause of the conflict, as no suicide notes were found in the house. They needed to analyze the mobile phones and computers of all family members, which were seized immediately, hoping to uncover new information. However, a complete analysis would take time. It remains a puzzling question why a loving father, who seems to be a good family man, would kill his wife and children but spare his youngest son. The weapon used in the crime was taken for examination, confirming that all members of Candy's family, including Jonathan, were shot with the same gun. Only Jonathan's fingerprints were found on the handle, ruling out the involvement of anyone else in the attack. Notably, none of the victims, including Lindsay, showed any signs of defensive injuries, suggesting that Jonathan's violent outburst was completely unexpected and uncontrollable, leaving no one time to react or defend themselves. Lindsay, who did not die instantly, bled on the living room floor while Jonathan, upstairs, methodically killed their sleeping children. It is believed that Lindsay heard the commotion but was powerless to intervene. Detectives considered the incident to be highly unusual. Friends and relatives found it hard to believe that a devoted father and loving husband like Jonathan could commit such an atrocity. He had no criminal record, and police had never been called to their home for domestic disturbances. Initially, investigators considered other possibilities, such as robbery or an attack by a stranger, but none of these theories added up. The family was well-liked and had no enemies, and Jonathan seemed incapable of such violence. Investigations cleared Jonathan of any doubts regarding his innocence. Officers interviewed relatives and neighbors to find potential explanations for the tragedy. Those close to the family described them as friendly and problem-free, with Jonathan being a respected community member who avoided criminal behavior. His service record was impeccable, and he was seen as calm and non-confrontational. The suddenness of the incident deeply shocked his relatives, as there had been no warning signs leading up to it. While some considered Jonathan a psychopath, they acknowledged that although disagreements between him and his wife occurred occasionally, they were rare and never involved violence. People struggled to accept his guilt, and as police statements regarding the investigation emerged, confusion set in. The community sought answers to the questions raised by the media, eagerly seeking clarity amidst the turmoil. On the day of the tragedy, Candy's family did not reach out to relatives or friends. They spent time together just once, going to the store for groceries, after which the older children left home to meet their friends. Nevertheless, they all reunited in the evening. The youngest child was unaware of any issues. It felt like a regular day. Jonathan remained calm and did not show any signs of anger. An alarming piece of information came from Michael Buru, a neighbor of the Andy family, who revealed that Jonathan had often helped him with construction and household tasks before the tragedy. They maintained a close relationship and even talked about personal matters. Michael mentioned that Jonathan once confided in him about his struggles, admitting he was dealing with depression and was taking medication prescribed by a doctor. However, Jonathan suggested that he had overcome his illness and that his depression had improved. He claimed to feel fine and had no lingering negativity toward his spouse, attributing his previous unhappiness to his mental state. After that conversation, no one heard him mention a relapse. There were no incidents indicating a return of his depressive symptoms. Investigators reviewed Jonathan's medical records but found nothing new. He had not sought help from psychiatrists or psychologists in recent times. If there had been any changes in Jonathan's condition, they would likely have been noticeable in his behavior. However, the investigation hit a dead end because no one reported anything suspicious. Some family members were aware of Jonathan's past depression, which had been resolved years ago, but they expressed no concern about his current state. Jonathan's mother mentioned that he had quickly overcome his illness and that his depression had not negatively impacted family relationships. Rather, his wife had supported him throughout. People close to Candy's family did not perceive Jonathan's struggles as serious. After overcoming his depression, he seemed to be part of a normal, happy family. The detectives found no additional leads. Was it possible that Jonathan experienced a resurgence of depression? If so, was he keeping it hidden? This was the only potential explanation for what had happened and could provide a motive. However, psychiatrists noted that it would be very difficult to hide such a condition given their active social life. Lindsay and Jonathan regularly spent time with their children, enjoying a vibrant lifestyle filled with barbecues and social gatherings. Their last barbecue event took place on Saturday, April 20th, at Michael's house, where neither Jonathan nor his wife displayed any signs of conflict. What occurred in their home did not align with the existing narrative. More information was needed, but it was lacking. There was hope that insights from mobile phones and computers could reveal important clues. There was a suspicion that jealousy might have played a role in the murder. However, even this line of investigation yielded little. The initial examination revealed no significant findings. Jonathan and his wife communicated regularly on social media, but their conversations appeared to be friendly, without any signs of intrigue or infidelity. Consequently, any theories about betrayal had to be set aside until a thorough analysis of their correspondence could be conducted. Additionally, Lindsay and Jonathan conducted routine searches online, but nothing concerning emerged. The main witness for the police in the case was a 10-year-old boy who, for unknown reasons, had been taken in by his maternal relatives. Many compassionate individuals wanted to help him deal with his trauma, leading to the creation of a fund aimed at raising $100,000 for his support. By the fall of 2024, the fund had already collected over $74,000, and donations were still pouring in. During the spring, the boy attracted attention not only from those offering emotional and financial support but also from law enforcement officers conducting investigations. The police did not speak to him immediately, recognizing that he was in shock and struggling to cope with his traumatic experience. Despite his young age, he was very aware of the horrific event that had claimed the lives of his loved ones. Initially, the boy had trouble sleeping, often waking up screaming and in tears. Multiple psychologists worked with him after he once expressed that he did not want to live. His relatives rallied around him, helping to ease the effects of his severe trauma, but he still faced many challenges ahead. Experts concluded that the boy could meet with the police to provide them with important information, so a child psychologist was brought in to ensure he felt safe and comfortable during the conversation. The psychologist collaborated with investigators to create a list of topics that would be least traumatic for the child. However, despite their efforts, what the boy shared mirrored what others familiar with his family had reported. He struggled to understand why his father had committed such a violent act. He recalled hearing his parents arguing before bedtime, but he could not comprehend the details. A fan was running in the room, drowning out the sounds of the argument, and eventually, he fell asleep, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. The boy also confirmed that Jonathan was never cruel or aggressive. He had never hurt his children or his wife, Lindsay. Detectives wanted to know why no one else reacted to the shooting that began inside the house. The other children must have heard their mother's screams, yet they were fast asleep and were shot during the night. It seemed as though fate was on the side of evil. Jonathan used a small caliber pistol, which is relatively quiet, and forensic experts suggested this might explain why neighbors didn't notice anything during such a quiet time of day. However, it was puzzling that none of the children in the house woke up or heard anything until it was too late. The younger child mentioned that fans were running in every room, which might have muffled the sounds of the shots. Despite the police's efforts, they could not gather new information from the child. The detectives had to ask him some uncomfortable questions regarding the incident, the positions of the bodies, and the bloodshed. Eventually, the boy became anxious and began to cry. The child psychologist decided to halt the questioning to prevent further distress for the boy, leaving the detectives without any new leads. Relatives reported that after meeting with the police, the boy became even more anxious. Psychologists were worried about how to help him deal with this new trauma, as he had just begun to recover from his previous experiences. The police's questioning raised feelings of fear, despair, and helplessness once again. Consequently, they decided not to push him further and to avoid drawing media attention to him. Journalists, being less sensitive, made it more challenging for the boy to maintain his privacy. However, through collective efforts, they managed to secure confidentiality for him. Despite the presence of an expert during the police interview with the boy, it appeared to have a detrimental effect on him. During this time, he stayed with his aunt, who became his official guardian. It is expected that once the fund raises enough money, she will receive financial support to help her nephew address his mental health issues. He continues to suffer from frequent panic attacks, disrupted sleep, and nightmares that have not improved. His aunt believes that the funds should not only cover rehabilitation but also ensure that he can pursue an education and rebuild his life. While this support may seem like a weak consolation and cannot bring back his loved ones, he must navigate a long and challenging recovery with the help of those close to him. Investigators were able to reconstruct the events surrounding the tragedy. It began after an argument between Jonathan and Lindsay escalated, leading him to grab a weapon. He first shot his wife, Lindsay, severely injuring her. She fell to the floor, bleeding but still alive. Jonathan, still armed, was consumed by rage as he entered the children's rooms. He encountered his 18-year-old son, Dylan, and attacked him on the head without hesitation. Dylan was using earplugs, likely to avoid being disturbed by the argument. It's possible that had he not been wearing them, the outcome might have been different. The fatal shot instantly claimed Dylan's life. Jonathan then moved to Ethan's room, where he also attacked his child on the head. The same tragic fate befell his 12-year-old son, Lucas. Only the youngest son, who is 10 years old, survived. The reasons for this remain unclear. Perhaps the father felt pity for the youngest, or he miscalculated and mistakenly overlooked his room. Jonathan went downstairs and returned to the living room. It seemed he understood what had happened, so he ended his life. On April 23rd, a group made up of people who cared for the family and the surviving child came to pay their respects. 39-year-old Lindsay was remembered as a devoted mother and loving wife. As a housewife, she did everything she could to ensure her children were comfortable. 18-year-old Dylan was described as a kind young man who supported his family and was always there for his loved ones. Intelligent and strong, he was a source of support for his friends. The family and friends are heartbroken by this tremendous loss. The youngest victim, 12-year-old Lucas, was unaware that the real threat to his life came from someone close to him. Jonathan will be remembered as a good father and husband, recognized for his ability to uplift spirits and make others laugh. Many struggled to believe that he could commit such an act. Although they acknowledged the evidence against him, they speculated that he was in a state of altered consciousness or psychosis that he couldn't control. At the last press conference, the detectives reported that there can be no doubt that the killer of the Candy family was Jonathan. However, by this time, there was no other information. The only thing the forensic scientist managed to achieve was to cross out any other suspects from the list. Unfortunately, even after several months, nothing new was found out, and the exact reason for the attack remains unknown. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Carolyn Watson. If kidnapping is not about satisfying the criminal's painful desires, then most often, the attackers seek money. But it is not always that simple. Some frightening actions have a much more mundane nature. Budgery, in Australia, does not seem like a place where something terrifying could happen. It is a rural and remote area with a population of fewer than 200 people. Located in the peaceful region of Victoria, it is not even marked on all maps. The local community consists of only a few dozen families, and everyone knows each other well. However, this calm and measured pace did not prevent criminal stories from surfacing. The media began to write about the quiet and prosperous life in Budgery, which changed in 2008 due to an event that made the entire continent shudder. A man named Julian Buchwald, 25, lived there. His family owns a large piece of land in the area. Julian had a girlfriend, 17-year-old Carolyn Watson, who lived in a neighboring town. They had been dating for about 2 years. Even in his younger years, Julian loved to explore the surroundings, especially his plot of land, to satisfy his natural curiosity. The difficult terrain, combined with the abundance of vegetation, offered plenty of opportunities for imagination and exploration. Both Julian and Carolyn continued to live with their parents. Despite dating for 2 years, they were very serious about their relationship. They often discussed the prospects of marriage. Being deeply religious individuals, just like their families, they even visited the local pastor of the church to declare their desire to marry during a Sunday service, where they had first met. Faith played a significant role in their lives. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Julian picked up Carolyn from her home for a picnic. She lived in the neighboring town of Churchill, which was a bit larger, with about 5,000 people. It was located about 20 minutes away by car from Budgery. After leaving, they returned to Julian's house because he had forgotten some food in the car that could spoil in the heat. They gathered everything they needed and quickly left before it got too hot. Typically, Julian and Carolyn would relax on Julian's family property, where there were plenty of secluded spots that looked picturesque for a romantic outing. However, this time, they decided to venture further to visit a nearby waterfall. Around 3 p.m., they planned to return. Most of the journey went smoothly, but just before reaching the waterfall, Julian suddenly became alarmed. He noticed the carcass of an animal on the side of the road, so he slowed down and stopped at a safe distance around a small bend. He told Carolyn that he wanted to get out to check, as he thought the animal might still be alive and he could help it. This curiosity wasn't unusual for him. Carolyn had gotten used to these quirks and decided to wait for him inside the SUV while following his movements in the rearview mirror. At some point, Carolyn became distracted. When she looked back again, she no longer saw Julian. She assumed he had gone behind the hill or a turn, which is why she was out of view. But after some time, Julian still hadn't returned, and this began to worry her. He always came back quickly. Realizing they were far from the city and in the wilderness, Carolyn was afraid to get out of the car. Her boyfriend's absence increasingly troubled her. Suddenly, she caught sight of something even more frightening in the mirror. A figure darted into view. She saw a man standing next to the car. He looked threatening, fully dressed with gloves, and wearing a balaclava. Carolyn intended to lock the doors of the car, but the stranger had already jumped to her side, opened the door. Before she could react, pulled her out of the car and threw her to the ground. He covered her mouth with tape, silencing her screams, and she could barely resist. Within minutes, the kidnapper had bound and blindfolded her, then shoved her into the trunk of his car. Terrified, Carolyn hoped that Julian would return to save her. However, the kidnapper got behind the wheel and drove away, leaving her alone with her fear. She tried to escape, but the ropes were too tight to loosen. It felt like the trip lasted several hours. Eventually, the SUV came to a stop. The trunk opened. The kidnapper, still wearing a balaclava and gloves, stood in front of her again. He threw her onto the ground, and Carolyn realized she was still unable to free herself from her bindings. Despite her desperate attempts to do so, she had little idea of where she was located, but she saw that there was a dense forest surrounding her. The stranger tore off her clothes, using a knife to cut away her underwear, and then walked away. Carolyn was completely naked, lying next to the car. She heard a sound as if the kidnapper was digging. This noise came from a few meters away. Carolyn realized that she was about to die. She could not imagine what awaited her, but she understood that she would not get out of here alive. The only thing she could do in such a situation was to pray. At that time, Julian's mother and father noticed their absence and that both had left by car. Julian and Carolyn told their parents that they were going on a picnic together but did not specify the location. They were expected to return around 3 p.m., but the clock now read around 5 p.m. While everything could be attributed to youth and passion, Julian and Carolyn was always very responsible, was never late, especially for an extended period. Julian's mother called her son, but he didn't answer. Carolyn also ignored the calls. This was uncharacteristic for them, as they always stayed in touch. A delay of several hours seemed unthinkable, considering that they had not warned anyone that they would be late. The parents inspected the area around the house but found no traces of Julian and Carolyn. A search operation alone on such a large piece of land seemed pointless, so Julian's mother decided to return to the house and wait for them in the driveway. Suddenly, she discovered something strange. She saw a glint as from glass and found a bottle with a note inside that was stuck in the fence mesh. She read it, and its contents horrified her. Some criminal had written that he had kidnapped Julian and Carolyn. The text was full of obscene language. The criminal warned the parents not to report it to the police, otherwise, Carolyn would be burned alive, and Julian would die in agony. The kidnapper spoke of some business he had to attend to, stating that if he succeeded, the children would return home safe and sound, but only if the parents complied with all his demands. This message horrified she. Though she panicked, she was not going to follow the demands of the criminal and reported the matter to the police. Law enforcement officers immediately responded to the call and began to inspect the area, which was rugged terrain with a lot of vegetation. There was much work to be done. Relatives hoped that Julian and Carolyn had secluded themselves in the area since they rarely left Butchery. The family's situation worsened when Julian's relatives found out that both Julian's and Carolyn's families had received ominous notes. The families of Julian and Carolyn and the detectives met to discuss what had happened. Carolyn's father found a similar bottle on the porch of their house, which contained a message insisting that they not contact the police, also threatening to kill Julian and Carolyn. Even worse, he promised to deal with the entire family if his demands were violated. Everyone wondered what could possibly have motivated the hatred toward this sweet couple of young people. Initially, it was believed that that were just a cruel joke. Now the police had 2 notes, as well as the real disappearance of Julian and Carolyn. Until late in the evening, neither Julian nor Carolyn had made contact. The handwriting in both letters was identical. That means that the 2 families may have a common enemy. However, no one had the slightest idea who he might be. It was curious that the note contained a symbol that seemed to have an occult nature. Some group that considered Christians their enemies. This was considered a valuable clue, and it was quickly discovered that it was used by a certain satanic cult called the Order of Nine Angles. The history of this organization was checked and found that it had appeared in Great Britain back in the 60s, was actively luring in members in the 70s. However, the cult did not become widespread and did not have a large number of followers. Some of its members were being held accountable for extremist ideology and various threats. As the activists gained notoriety, the group opened branches in several countries around the world. Their ideology included isolating their members from the rest of society. They openly advocated for violence and committing crimes against perceived enemies, specifically targeting Christians whom they recognized as opponents to be destroyed. The most frightening aspect of this movement's activities was the propaganda promoting human sacrifices, which horrified families and prompted the police to intensify their efforts. Julian and Carolyn were simply devout Christians. Interestingly, until that point, the activities of this group had only been observed in Australia. They could potentially attempt to declare themselves by committing their first ritual murder. Satanists might use the sacrifice of Julian and Carolyn to gain fame from there began to gather like-minded people. The relatives did not receive any news for several days. Julian's car was declared wanted, but that didn't help. All the detectives' efforts proved in vain as they couldn't find either Julian and Carolyn or any leads on where to continue searching. Considering who Carolyn and Julian may have contacted, it was believed that it would be impossible to return they alive. The relatives knew that they had packed only a small amount of food meant to last a few hours. They had no worn clothes and no equipment. They did not have tents to survive the temperature fluctuations that occur in Australia during the day and night. There were also concerns about dangerous areas where Julian and Carolyn could fall victim to predators. The scorching heat and hunger posed significant threats. Even if they escaped from their kidnappers, encounters with wild or poisonous animals could be deadly. The rescue operation transitioned to a recovery effort, but this, too, yielded no results. 6 days passed during which the families of Julian and Carolyn did not find any peace. Suddenly, a message arrived: Julian and Carolyn had been found. What was most astonishing was that both were relatively safe. They had simply emerged onto the roadway near the Alpine National Park. A passing farmer stopped to help and immediately reported their situation to the police. It was not surprising that law enforcement officers were unable to find any trace of the individuals Julian and Carolyn. The national park was several hundred kilometers from where they lived, requiring about a 6-hour drive by car. Julian sustained serious injuries. While making their way through the desert, he suffered sunburn, cuts from thorny bushes, blisters, and bruises all over his body. Nonetheless, aside from the extreme stress of their ordeal, they were otherwise fine. Detectives met with Julian and Carolyn to gather information and prevent potentially dangerous criminals from operating in the area. They first communicated with Carolyn, who detailed the horrific trials she endured after being kidnapped. She described being undressed, thrown to the ground, where she lay and prayed just a few meters away from her kidnapper, who was digging in the earth. She was certain that this was her grave. This agonizing wait continued interminably until the sounds of digging stopped. Carolyn heard footsteps moving away, and everything went silent. Realizing that the criminal had abandoned her, she knew she could not remain passive. Quickly, she attempted to free herself from her ropes, but they did not yield. Her hands hurt as she rubbed them until they bled. Suddenly, she heard Julian's voice calling her name as he crawled closer. He managed to rip off her blindfold and the duct tape from her mouth. Julian, also tied up and without clothes, had managed to free his hands. This allowed Julian to finally escape and then free Carolyn. However, the danger was not over. The kidnapper could return at any moment. There was no car, but the abandoned backpack and scattered contents of the trunk remained. They found supplies that they had taken with them for a picnic, gathered everything, and fled into the thicket. They wanted to get as far away from that place as possible to plan their next steps. Along the way, Julian recounted his story. He approached an animal lying on the side of the road to examine the body, but as he leaned over, he heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind. He didn't have time to react before he was attacked. He was struck on the back of the head hard enough to lose consciousness. According to Julian, when he awoke a few hours later, he immediately began calling out for Carolyn. The criminal was no longer nearby, having escaped in an SUV. Over the next few days, they desperately tried to reach the road, making their way through thick bushes. They risked encountering wild animals. Even the slightest bite from an Australian poisonous spider or snake could be fatal. Their supplies were very limited since they had packed only a small amount of food for their picnic, specifically. During the day, Julian and Carolyn suffered from the suffocating heat, risking sunstroke. At night, they struggled to stay warm, sharing a single sleeping bag. The situation was compounded by the fear that the kidnapper could pursue them and find them at any moment. Both Julian and Carolyn were completely unaware of why this had happened to them. The situation worsened when, a few days later, they unwittingly returned to the same place where they had been held hostage. As it turned out, they had made a large circle. Nevertheless, Julian took advantage of the situation. Despite his fear of being caught, he was able to steal clothes and any remaining food, improving the dire condition of the starving couple. However, everything came to an end quickly. Carolyn fell into despair, feeling that they could not be saved, and found solace only in prayer. Finally, God heard her pleas. After 6 days, they were able to find their way out of the dense bushes. They emerged onto the road, where the police spoke to Julian, for the most part, confirmed his girlfriend's account, except for the part where he claimed to be unconscious. Julian and Carolyn was sent to stay in the hospital and then with their relatives, but law enforcement officers had no time to rest. Despite the miraculous rescue of the kidnapping victims, the armed forces still faced a real threat that the dangerous organization responsible for the kidnapping would continue its destructive activities. It had to be stopped at any cost. Before bloodshed could begin, the police decided to go to the place from which the prisoners had escaped. They found cut pieces of duct tape, clothing, a shovel, and other items, all of which were checked. To the detectives' amazement, some items belonged to Julian, including a rope found in his house's barn. There was also disturbed earth that had been dug up. The detectives discovered a balaclava, black clothing, gloves, and other things described by Carolyn. From that moment, Julian's story became even more disturbing. In particular, Julian was never able to show any signs of the head injuries he claimed to have sustained. Any such injuries should have remained visible, especially if Julian had indeed delivered a blow that could have knocked him out for several hours. They decided to talk to Julian again. From the start, the detectives made it clear that they had good reason to suspect him of kidnapping. Julian was nervous but insisted on his story, referring to his beloved, who confirmed much of what he said. However, within a few hours, he was brought to justice. Julian admitted that he had organized the kidnapping himself. He had bought the items he intended to use for the kidnapping in advance, taking some from home, including items that allowed him to hide his face from Carolyn. He had even trained for some time to tie knots that would not injure when immobilizing someone. The cult symbols used in the letters were meant to scare his parents and Carolyn's relatives into not contacting the police, preventing detective intervention. Julian deliberately used foul language in the letters he sent to the Buchwald and Watson families. No one thought he would say such words. Julian had deliberately chosen the longest route to the waterfall to avoid detection and confuse the tracks. The guy kept a lookout for anything suspicious that could attract attention and give him the opportunity to implement his plan. He eventually noticed an animal carcass on the side of the road and decided it was time to act. Julian stopped around a corner to hide from Carolyn's sight, changed his clothes, and returned to the car to play out the rest. The place he had chosen to take Carolyn was far away, allowing them to stay away from people. According to him, when Carolyn heard sounds of earth being dug up, he was actually not making a grave but getting rid of evidence. After that, he got into the car and drove away to hide it in the woods, then he returned to Carolyn. Along the way, he got rid of his clothes and wrapped ropes around his hands to make himself look like a kidnapped person. After that, he began to call her name in a weak voice, pretending that he had just regained consciousness after a blow to the head. The kidnapping was carefully planned. He had items that helped they survive this difficult period. Even the fact that they returned to the place from which they had escaped was part of the plan. However, one aspect still remained unclear. Why stage such a spectacle? 22-year-old Julian admitted that he wanted to marry Carolyn immediately. They had already been dating for 2 years, but she did not agree. 17-year-old Carolyn planned to finish school, decide on her future, go to college, get a job, become independent before finally tying the knot and starting a family. At the same time, both were devout Christians who believed in abstaining from intimate before marriage. He did not want to wait so long. He desperately wanted to satisfy his intimate desires, so he staged the kidnapping. He specifically planned everything so that they would both be isolated during their wandering through the dense thickets. Julian tried various tactics to persuade his girlfriend to be intimate. He reasoned that they might not survive this adventure, and it was worth trying intimate. He also convinced Carolyn that in the face of death, they had entered into an alliance in the fight for their lives, which he equated with marriage. Julian even tried to persuade her that they needed to engage in intimate intercourse to keep warm at night, claiming he had read about such a method somewhere. Carolyn was unwavering, continued to refuse, and insisted on her beliefs, convinced that God would save them. Therefore, his plan ultimately failed. Among the items Julian had prepared for the trip, there was a map of the national park. They had not actually gotten lost when Julian realized Carolyn was not going to give up. Therefore, he decided to lead them out of this national park. After Julian's confession, he was slapped by Carolyn, charged with kidnapping and perjury. The trial was scheduled for August 2009. Julian was not held in jail after the trial because his wealthy family posted bail. Julian took advantage of the situation and made another attempt to escape punishment. In September 2009, he obtained an Indian passport, boarded a plane, and flew to China. The document was obviously fake but of sufficient quality to fool Australian security services. Julian dyed his hair black and spent a long time sunbathing to darken his skin as much as possible, even though he was fair-skinned and required many tanning sessions. Although he managed to fly out of Australia, the Indian security services were more vigilant and refused to let him enter the country. Julian was arrested in Singapore. It was assumed that India was only the first stop on his journey and that Germany was intended to be his final destination. After that, he received a sentence of 7 years and 3 months for kidnapping, as well as an additional 6 months for escaping. He tried to challenge the court's decision, arguing that it was too harsh, but could not contest the fact that the kidnapping in this incident was a significant issue. In another unexpected turn of events, it was revealed that Julian was originally from Germany. His family had moved to Australia at an early age. In 2014, the Immigration Service considered the possibility of canceling his visa. Julian tried to resist this decision but failed. In 2016, he was deported to Germany, ending up in a country where he did not know the language at all. There were no relatives or acquaintances with whom he could start anew. His further fate is not reliably known, and there is no information about whether he went to prison. According to some sources, Julian's situation has worsened. On the other hand, Carolyn could not come to her senses for a long time after such a betrayal. It was difficult for her to learn to trust people, especially men. What happened in her life afterward is unknown. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979, in Baytown, Texas. Her childhood was challenging, as her parents, Pamela Sue Surratt and Anthony Paul Tony Walters, struggled with addiction, leading to an unstable home life. Tragically, she lost both parents to apparent overdoses by the age of 11. After their deaths, she was raised by her grandmother and later by her uncle, Jeff Walters. Despite these hardships, she was known for her vibrant smile, striking blue eyes, and uplifting personality. Crystal pursued a career as a flight attendant, where her adventurous spirit thrived as she traveled across the country. During her journey, she met Stephen Wayne McDowell, who was 7 years older than she. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his large stature, Stephen won Crystal's heart. They married in April 2007 after dating for a while. He had a daughter from a previous marriage and worked as a shipping manager, but he struggled to maintain stable employment, which forced Crystal to become the primary breadwinner. While she excelled in her career, Stephen's professional instability created tension in their relationship, especially concerning her frequent travels. As jealousy grew, Stephen began to suspect Crystal of having affairs during her flights, despite the lack of evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal valued her family and sought stability, given her difficult past. In 2016, after 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she decided to leave and join her family's real estate business. This shift allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of stability. Her uncle Jeff was proud to welcome her into the third generation of their real estate legacy. Crystal quickly excelled in her new role, being recognized for her charm, professionalism, and dedication. However, she confided in close friends that this career change also served a strategic purpose, as she believed it would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, Crystal's marriage had deteriorated significantly, prompting her to file for divorce due to years of emotional distress. On March 20th, she called 911, claiming Stephen had threatened her and their children. The authorities responded but treated the case as a precaution rather than a criminal incident. At that time, there were no custody arrangements, allowing Stephen to legally be with his children. Although officers attempted to contact him, they were unsuccessful. A few days later, Stephen returned the children, and Crystal chose not to press charges, opting instead to focus on reducing tension for the sake of their kids. Crystal's friends commented that she tried her best to keep the divorce amicable, putting the happiness of her children first. Stephen's adult daughter was troubled by this incident and questioned her father about his behavior. He expressed anger over alleged affairs that Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that those close to her dismissed as false. Many who knew them recognized that their relationship had been toxic for years, and even Stephen's daughter acknowledged that, while she and Crystal had a great relationship, the marriage had always been unstable. Although their divorce was finalized in June 2017 and appeared to be friendly, especially since Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while renovating her own, issues beneath the surface remained unresolved. Crystal often asked her family not to mention their plans or outings to Stephen, fearing his unpredictable reactions. Even simple activities, like spending time with a friend, could set him off. Despite being legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept the situation. His social media activity displayed a concerning trend. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile picture to a tombstone, then to an image of Santa Muerte, and later reverted to a photo of himself with Crystal. His post suggested an image of a happy family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to emotionally support Stephen, checking in on him regularly. He claimed to be adjusting to the separation and focusing on his life, but his behavior suggested otherwise. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted pictures of himself bringing Crystal coffee in bed, as if their relationship was still going strong. In an effort to maintain a harmonious co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a trip with Stephen and the kids, but their intimacy only blurred the lines further. Then, in August 2017, things shifted. Crystal, now 37, met Paul Hargrave, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charming, ambitious, and shared Crystal's passion for travel and adventure. Their relationship developed quickly, and for the first time in a long time, Crystal felt truly happy. Although she wanted to tell her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it a secret until she found the right time to inform Stephen, still fearful of his reaction. However, that fear didn't stop her from publicly sharing her happiness. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never felt so joyful and that her heart was filled with a happiness she never thought possible. Just 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey approached. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and fulfill her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had collected clean water for the kids and informed him that she was heading to his house to take shelter with them. She intended to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras recorded the last known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels, holding her phone, as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's uncle Jeff became worried. They were close, working together in real estate and communicating frequently. He tried calling her several times to let her know that a scheduled showing had been canceled because of the storm. When she didn't answer, Jeff contacted Stephen, who sent a suspicious text, allegedly from Crystal's phone, at 9:30 a.m., stating that she planned to pick up the kids and go to Dallas. Jeff was immediately suspicious. Crystal never changed her plans without informing him, and her phone was essential for her work. Things didn't add up, and fearing something was wrong, he reported her missing to the police before noon on August 26th. As floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and 2 family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house in over a week, but his daughter told Jeff that she had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home. Inside, authorities discovered Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, along with her purse and handbag, clear evidence that she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was evident that Stephen was involved in her disappearance. Unfortunately, at the time, Hurricane Harvey had devastated the area, and many law enforcement officers and first responders were focused on rescue efforts in flooded neighborhoods. Consequently, the investigation stalled almost immediately. Desperate for answers, Jeff decided to reach out to the media to raise awareness and search for clues. However, his efforts were overshadowed by the constant news coverage of the storm. After days of no progress, Jeff hired a private investigator, feeling frustrated with the silence of local authorities. This decision sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney opposed the involvement of an outside investigator in Crystal's case, arguing that crucial evidence could be compromised. This resulted in increased tensions between Crystal's family, law enforcement, and the local media in Houston. Unwilling to give up, Jeff teamed up with Crystal's new boyfriend, Paul, to offer a $15,000 reward for credible information. They launched a social media campaign that ultimately attracted public attention. However, the investigators began to suspect not only Stephen but also Jeff and Paul. Although Jeff was tirelessly searching for Crystal, law enforcement remained skeptical of him. Rumors about his personal life, including his same-sex relationships, spread throughout the town of Baytown, leading some to believe that these biases influenced how authorities perceived his involvement. The local police commander dismissed Jeff's concerns during a national broadcast, labeling him as overly emotional and a hindrance to the investigation. Paul was also scrutinized. After taking a polygraph test with inconclusive results, his credibility came into question. Things worsened when he sent surveillance footage from his home to news outlets instead of directly giving it to the police. Paul defended his actions by stating that he initially tried to share the videos with the sheriff's office but felt ignored, prompting him to go public to clear his name. Then there was Stephen. Even though he displayed manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal left him, investigators perceived him as polite, helpful, and cooperative. However, family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and controlling. Authorities did not see Stephen as a potential threat or a vengeful ex-husband. This perspective began to shift on Tuesday, August 29th, as floodwaters receded. A family friend discovered Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a dilapidated motel, an area highlighted during their online campaign. The doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators suspect the car was staged as a burglary, but flooding has made it difficult to access. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26th, the day she disappeared. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He did not purchase gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car was still there. Even more unsettling, other footage captured a hooded figure resembling Stephen riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The evidence was accumulating, and for the first time, attention turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband but as a potential suspect in a case that had gone too long without resolution. The investigation took a significant turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart, situated just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was discovered, showed a man who looked like Stephen buying a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid with cash, and the timing matched the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this troubling evidence, he denied being involved in Crystal's disappearance. As authorities indicated they lacked direct evidence, they allowed him to go home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Her uncle, Jeff, pointed out to the district attorney that Crystal had previously reported that Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she left him. Jeff was convinced of Stephen's emotional and mental instability. It wasn't until September 8, nearly 2 weeks after Crystal vanished, that the district attorney intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. However, Stephen controlled the situation. He requested to return home for one last night to organize things and promised to confess the next day. Jeff and other family members were angry, fearing that this unsupervised time might allow Stephen to harm himself and evade justice. On September 9, 2017, Stephen returned to the police station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal had told him she would be taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on a family trip instead of him. Due to this, he became enraged. While their children slept upstairs, he attacked Crystal from behind and strangled her to death. Afterward, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and drove before sunrise to a wooded area near his home, where he disposed of her remains. Even after confessing, he still refused to reveal the location of the body unless the prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Due to the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities worried that they wouldn't find the body without his assistance, so they accepted his terms. Later that day, Stephen guided authorities to a remote, overgrown area, and Crystal's remains were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, who was 44 at the time, was charged with first-degree murder, and bail was set at $500,000, which he could not afford. In addition to the issues of jealousy and anger, the case also highlights a more terrifying truth. Without Crystal, Stephen would have no financial resources to support himself and his children. The pursuit of justice moved slowly, as the trial did not commence until June 2019. During this time, Stephen displayed no remorse in court. He tried to create the impression that he was a man suffering from pain, claiming he acted out of a sudden fit of passion, a defense strategy in Texas that could significantly lessen his punishment if accepted. He also suggested that Crystal's death was the result of a consensual encounter that went awry. However, the prosecution effectively countered this narrative, highlighting the ongoing emotional abuse and control he had imposed during their relationship. Stephen's defense team attempted to tarnish Crystal's reputation by presenting unverified text messages and claims that she had been unfaithful. However, her friends and family stood up for her, describing her as a vibrant and loving person dedicated to her children. They also shared experiences of the years of dysfunction and manipulation she endured. One of the most heart-wrenching moments during the trial occurred when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand. She recounted a painful revelation in December 2017 when Stephen and Crystal's 5-year-old daughter shared a secret. The girl recalled the morning her mother went missing. She had heard her parents arguing. After hearing the commotion, she walked from the bathroom into the bedroom, where she witnessed her father pushing her mother onto the bed and covering her mouth and nose with his hand. She stood at the edge of the bed and watched until her mother stopped moving. Afterwards, her father took her upstairs and told her not to speak about what she had seen. Mandy quickly reported the incident to the authorities, and she was placed in a trauma counseling program, but the emotional scars continued to haunt her. Another important witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. Melissa testified about helping Crystal move out of her home when her conflicts with Stephen escalated. Melissa later supported her move back home after Stephen threatened to harm himself if she did not return. Cherry recounted that even after the divorce, he continued to emotionally manipulate Crystal, including starving himself to make her feel responsible for his health. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's house, where they found him looking anxious, shaking, and in tears. The daughter of Crystal and Stephen claimed that she had seen her mother the day before and pointed to a black dress in the closet in a concerning manner, saying that evil spirits had taken her away. This disturbing scene prompted Melissa and Jeff to call the police from outside the house, urgently requesting that they remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their requests were ignored. Melissa also shared her account of a family cruise that Stephen had suggested as a way to say goodbye peacefully. Although Crystal hesitantly agreed, she made it clear that there would be no threats, manipulation, or harm involved. However, as the trip approached, an argument over finances led her to cancel, realizing that Stephen was not genuinely trying to say goodbye but was instead attempting to win her back. The most troubling testimony came from an inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen and claimed that Stephen confessed in detail to killing Crystal. According to the inmate, the motive was a text message from another man. He described how Stephen admitted to using zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after her death, information only known to the forensic team. Officials from the Texas Department of Public Safety corroborated parts of Stephen's confession, stating that he claimed Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They had an argument, during which she told him that she had never really loved him. She encouraged him to move on with his life. In a fit of rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial concluded quickly. The jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder in just 3.5 hours. On September 10, 2019, he received a sentence of 50 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 25 years before being eligible for parole, potentially allowing for his release in 2042. Crystal's family was heartbroken by what they perceived as a light sentence. Her uncle Jeff exclaimed in court that Stephen deserved a harsher punishment, while others expressed frustration, advocating for a life sentence or the death penalty. However, those options were not available due to the agreement Stephen made in exchange for revealing the location of Crystal's body. The family's main concern was not the length of the prison sentence but rather the emotional impact on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, they faced a devastating loss. Crystal had dedicated her life to them, and now they were left to cope with trauma that many adults would struggle to endure. By 2020, Mandy, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was working to adopt them legally. Some sources indicate that Mandy was Crystal's best friend from childhood, while others suggest they may have had a romantic relationship at one time. Regardless of their history, Mandy was Crystal's most trusted confidant and was committed to caring for the children. Now that you know the complete story, we would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Please share your opinion in the comments. We are reading all of them. Zuzu Verk was born on April 22, 1995, in Keller, Texas. She grew up in a warm and loving family alongside her parents, Glenn Verk and Lori, and her older brother, Miles. Her brother described her as the brightest light in their lives. Zuzu attended Timber Creek High School and, after graduating, moved to Alpine, Texas, to study at the local university. She chose to major in conservation biology, driven by her passion for protecting the planet's wild spaces and creatures. Her academic achievements were impressive. She had recently made the Dean's List and was in the process of transferring to Texas University for her senior year. She was not only a dedicated student but also ambitious, idealistic, and focused on her goals. Her love for nature influenced her vision for the future. After college, she dreamed of living in Japan, where she could combine her passion for travel with her environmental advocacy. While in Alpine, she became involved with Robert Fabian, a young man 4 years her senior. At first, the relationship was based solely on attraction, but gradually became more complicated. Robert's charm attracted Zuzu, but her family, particularly her mother Lori and brother Miles, had some concerns about him. Lori viewed Robert as self-centered and dismissive, while Miles felt he was controlling and worried that he didn't support Zuzu's ambitions, particularly her desire to leave Alpine and pursue her dreams. Zuzu herself had similar worries. While she remained in the relationship, she confided in her mother that she couldn't envision a future with Robert. It felt more like a relationship of convenience than one based on genuine connection. Despite this, she remains kind and hopeful, reflecting her personality as she prepares to inform Robert about her transfer and her next choice. The last conversation Lori had with Zuzu was on October 10, 2016. Zuzu was excited to share that she was transferring to Texas University and ending her relationship with Robert. He had planned to take her to a movie the following night. Lori had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever hear her daughter's voice. As days went by without any word from Zuzu, worry turned into panic. Zuzu was known for always responding to messages, so her silence was unusual. Her parents, deeply concerned, started contacting everyone they knew who might have seen her. When Lori reached out to Robert, he said he hadn't seen Zuzu and mentioned that he was giving her some space. On October 14, 2016, Zuzu was officially reported missing. A massive search effort began, involving local authorities, state officials, and hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters flew over the desert, horseback riders searched difficult trails, and search teams extended their efforts hundreds of miles, even into Mexico. Flyers were distributed throughout the town, and a $100,000 reward was offered in hopes of finding Zuzu. However, hopes began to fade over time. The investigation began to focus on Robert Fabian. He told detectives that on the evening of October 11th, he and Zuzu had dinner at his apartment. He claimed that their dinner took a negative turn when he mentioned an ex-girlfriend, prompting Zuzu to leave in the early morning hours. He stated that he called her later but decided to stop trying to reach her when she didn't respond. This account raised suspicions with the police. A key witness was John Franco, a neighbor who resides downstairs from Robert. John reported seeing Zuzu enter Robert's apartment the night she disappeared. He could hear familiar sounds coming from Robert's apartment, such as chatter and laughter, but there was one strange moment. He heard Robert shout, "Shut up," breaking the usual atmosphere. Later, around 4 a.m., John saw Robert leaving the apartment alone, while Zuzu's car remained parked outside. John also recalled hearing what he thought were arguments and odd thuds from above, details that would later prove crucial. When investigators confronted Robert with this new information, his story changed. He now claimed that after the argument about the ex-girlfriend, He had left to drive to Dairy Queen to think things over. He said that when he returned, Zuzu was still there but left shortly after. This inconsistency raised enough suspicion for the detectives to request a search of Robert's apartment, to which he agreed. Inside, they found disturbing evidence. The bed was completely stripped of linens, and items like the mattress pad, clothes, and sheets had a strong smell of bleach. This painted a troubling picture. Investigators began to suspect that Zuzu's disappearance might be more complicated than they had initially thought. As the investigation expanded, a notable friend of Robert's, Chris Estrada, came to the group's attention. Their friendship dated back to high school, and this closeness made Chris a subject of scrutiny. Concerns grew after Chris appeared on national television on December 6, 2016, during an episode of Crime Watch Daily. Viewers and authorities noted his rigid posture, awkward mannerisms, and forced expressions. Phone records showed that Robert had called Chris at 3:15 a.m. on October 12, the same morning Zuzu went missing. During the investigation, Chris revealed that Robert had requested to borrow his credit card the day before, claiming to need it to buy plastic tarps for a painting project. This explanation raised suspicions. Why would anyone need painting supplies late at night? Investigators found the reasoning questionable and the timing suspicious. Another important witness, Brittany, told investigators that Chris had arrived at her apartment around midnight on October 13, appearing shaken. He looked pale and anxious, as if he had witnessed something disturbing. When she asked what was wrong, Chris allegedly replied, "Don't interfere." Despite these troubling signs, the case hit a dead end. All the evidence was circumstantial. There was no body and no concrete proof linking Robert to any crime. Zuzu's family, feeling devastated and desperate for answers, held press conferences urging Robert to come forward and help, but he remained silent. Weeks turned into months. However, on February 3, 2017, 3 months after Zuzu went missing, everything changed. While patrolling a remote area of Brewster County near Alpine, the police noticed something unusual: a disturbed patch of soil. As they approached, they saw plastic sticking out of the dirt, along with a blue sock and a piece of dark fabric. They immediately alerted the authorities. When investigators arrived and began to dig, their worst fears were realized. Inside a shallow grave, wrapped in a plastic painter's drop cloth, lay the body of Zuzu. DNA tests later confirmed her identity. Zuzu, a vibrant young woman with dreams of studying at Texas University, wanting to live in Japan, and who loved the stars and the earth, had finally been found. The plastic wrap used to conceal her body matched the type Robert had purchased at Dollar General using Chris's borrowed credit card. This was the crucial evidence. Within 24 hours of the discovery, Robert was arrested and charged with evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. 2 days later, Chris was also arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, facing similar charges. The charges against Robert were soon upgraded to murder. In April 2018, Chris agreed to plead guilty and testify against his best friend, Robert, and he did not deny his role in the crime. In contrast, Robert maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty. His defense attorney argued that there was no direct physical evidence, no fingerprints or DNA linking Robert to the murder. However, prosecutors pointed to Robert's suspicious behavior after Zuzu's disappearance. He bleached sheets, changed his story multiple times, and showed an unusual interest in the investigation. A coworker even testified that Robert, who was once calm, became erratic after Zuzu went missing, frequently inquiring about law enforcement activities. This behavior indicated not a concerned boyfriend, but someone anxious about their own involvement in a crime. The trial was painful for Zuzu's family but also brought some closure as the grim truth emerged. Zuzu's memory would endure, cherished by her family as a vibrant young woman with dreams and aspirations that were tragically cut short. On the third day of the trial, silence fell over the courtroom as Chris took the witness stand and made a confession that would alter the case's direction. He described a night marked by desperation, phone calls, and a secret that was never meant to be shared. Chris testified that Robert called him late at night, insisting it was a life-or-death situation. During their conversation, Robert recounted a distressing evening with Zuzu that turned violent. According to Chris, an argument led to Robert strangling Zuzu. As she gasped for air and eventually stopped breathing, Robert panicked. Chris claimed that Robert attempted to perform CPR, but it was too late. Following this incident, Chris testified that Robert entered survival mode, attempting to conceal his actions. Claims that Zuzu's death was an accident seem disingenuous. Strangulation is a deliberate and conscious act, not a knee-jerk reaction. Chris confessed that Robert repeatedly called him, pleading for help in disposing of Zuzu's body. At one point, Robert even showed up at Chris's home in Alpine, begging for help and urging him not to go to the police. Although Chris claimed he refused to assist Robert, he admitted that he did not report what he knew, a decision that would haunt the investigation. While he was not physically involved in Zuzu's death, his silence prolonged the suffering of her family and hindered the pursuit of justice. Whether motivated by fear, loyalty, or moral indecision, Chris chose silence over honesty, leaving Zuzu's family in the dark for an extended period. In an unexpected turn of events, a new witness took the stand in the courtroom. Roy Roman, who once shared a cell with Robert at Brewster County Jail, testified that Robert had privately admitted to killing Zuzu. He claimed Robert was motivated by Zuzu's discovery of secrets he wanted to keep hidden. Specifically, she had learned about a potential romantic involvement between him and Chris, and she threatened to expose it. Fearing this revelation, Roy stated that Robert decided to silence Zuzu permanently. Roy described Robert as distraught in his cell, repeatedly saying that he hadn't meant to do that. On May 8, 2019, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Robert Fabian was found guilty on all counts and received a life sentence in prison, along with an additional 29 years for tampering with evidence. Chris Estrada, who had earlier accepted a plea deal and testified against Robert, was sentenced to 42 months in prison and fined for tampering with evidence and evading law enforcement. While Zuzu's family felt a sense of justice from the verdict, it did not bring them peace. Their beloved daughter was gone forever, and nothing could change that. In the midst of their grief, they received a painful reminder of what could have been, a letter from Texas University confirming Zuzu's acceptance into a program she had worked tirelessly to join. It was her dream, but tragically, she would never live to experience it. To honor Zuzu, the university renamed its amphitheater to Zuzu's Place and established a scholarship in natural resource management in her name, celebrating her dedication to protecting the natural world. However, the emotional scars from Zuzu's murder remain profound. Her brother, Miles, thought of her often and cherished small memories, like her washing dishes or her goodnight wishes, which now served as sweet but wistful reminders of the times they had together. Zuzu's family, although heartbroken, remains strong and is incredibly grateful for the ongoing support from the Alpine community. They acknowledged that without this support, they might not have survived the darkest times of their lives. Zuzu was a visionary, full of dreams of a life rich with purpose, travel, and making a difference. Her story serves as a heartbreaking warning: never remain in relationships that stifle your growth. Never let anyone prevent you from becoming your true self. Zuzu was close to achieving the freedom and life she dreamed of, but in the end she didn't succeed. Her story also reminds us to protect our dreams, stay independent, and never let anyone make us choose between love and freedom. The tragic case of Dr. Teresa Sievers, a story that illustrates how love can transform into betrayal and how greed can lead to horrific violence. How did a dedicated mother and accomplished doctor become the target of a murder scheme? What concealed truths were hidden behind closed doors? Let's delve into this story. Dr. Teresa Sievers was a physician dedicated to her patients. She graduated from Ross University School of Medicine in 1996 and opened her practice in Bonita Springs, Florida. Teresa focused on integrating traditional and alternative medicine to help patients who had run out of other treatment options. Her husband, Mark Sievers, worked as the office manager in her practice. They married in 2003 and had 2 daughters. Mark was initially seen as a supportive husband, but his behavior came under investigation after Teresa's murder. Financial difficulties faced by the family played a significant role in the subsequent events. The conspiracy to murder Dr. Teresa Sievers began at the wedding of Curtis Wayne Wright in May 2015. Mark, who was a guest, confided in Wright about his mental health struggles and his fear that Teresa would take their children away from him. Mark expressed his wish for Teresa to be killed, driven by financial motives concerning her life insurance policies with a total value of $4,433 million. He thought that her death would resolve his problems and provide the financial security he needed. Although initially hesitant, Wright eventually agreed to help Mark, stating that he could deal with the matter in exchange for a share of the insurance payout. Unbeknownst to Mark, Wright then enlisted the help of a third man to assist in the murder, Jimmy Ray Rogers, whom Wright had paid to help him. During his trial, Wright described Rogers as a violent individual with a background involving other murders, suggesting that he was well suited for the violent act against Teresa. Mark outlined two possible plans for carrying out the murder. The first plan involved killing Teresa at her home on June 28 and making it look like a burglary. To get ready for this, Mark checked how to access their property by climbing over the backyard fence and trimming bushes to clear a path to the garage. He also coached Wright on how to enter the house and disable the security system. The second plan proposed by Mark was to murder Teresa at her medical office on June 29, disguising it as a mugging. He provided Wright with aerial photos of the office, pointing out a hidden stairwell that Teresa often used when leaving late at night. Mark also shared the access codes for this stairwell with Wright, stressing that no matter where the murder happened, it should appear to be a robbery or burglary. On June 28, 2015, Dr. Teresa returned to her home in Bonita Springs, Florida, after abruptly ending a family vacation in upstate New York. She arrived at Southwest Florida International Airport, where security cameras recorded her pulling her suitcase through the terminal. After calling her husband Mark to let him know she was safe, Teresa got into her car and drove home. Unbeknownst to her, two men were already inside her house, waiting to carry out a deadly plan devised by her own husband. Inside the house, Wright and Rogers were lying in wait. Wright had grabbed the hammer from the garage earlier. They had planned this situation carefully over several weeks. When Teresa entered the kitchen, Wright attacked her from behind and struck Teresa once on the head. Shocked by the surprise attack, she turned to face him but received another blow. The violence quickly escalated as Rogers also joined the assault with his own hammer. Together, they violently attacked Teresa, hitting her repeatedly until she collapsed on the floor in a pool of blood. Witnesses later recounted how Teresa fought back, instinctively raising her hands to shield herself from the strikes. Despite her brave attempts to defend herself, she suffered a total of 17 wounds to her head before the kitchen fell silent. Once they were sure Teresa was dead, Wright and Rogers left the scene without triggering the alarm system, which they had previously disabled based on information from Mark. The murder was carried out quickly and left no immediate signs of forced entry, as they had used an unlocked side door to enter. After committing their crime, Wright and Rogers returned to Missouri in their rental car, thinking they had successfully hidden their actions. Meanwhile, Mark received worrying news on the morning of June 29. His wife, Dr. Teresa, had not shown up for work. Worried about Teresa not being around, Mark called a family friend, Dr. Mark Petwrights, to check on her at home. Using the garage code Mark provided, Dr. Petwrights entered the home and discovered Teresa lying face down in a pool of blood, with a hammer next to her body. She was cold to the touch, and there were evident signs of a violent struggle. The brutal murder of Dr. Teresa shocked the Bonita Springs community. As a respected physician and mother, her death left many people in disbelief. Friends and patients expressed horror over the violent act against someone who had devoted her life to helping others, marking a tragic loss for the community. After Teresa was found dead, law enforcement launched an investigation. Detectives interviewed her family, friends, colleagues to learn more about her life and any possible threats. They also sought tips from the community, stressing the importance of any information that could help identify the person responsible. Investigators examined various aspects of Teresa's professional and personal life. Initially, they looked into people who had interacted with her or might have held grudges against her, but they did not find any immediate leads. Nearly 2 months later, a major breakthrough occurred when law enforcement received a tip from a source in Missouri. This tip revealed that Wright had confessed to someone about his role in Teresa's murder. Consequently, detectives concentrated their efforts on Wright. They traveled to Missouri to investigate further and gather evidence linking he to the crime. In August 2015, Wright and his accomplice, Rogers, were arrested in Missouri for their involvement in Teresa's murder. Many were surprised by the arrest since neither man was from the local area. A detailed investigation revealed important evidence linking them to the crime. Police carried out search warrants at their homes and collected various items, including clothing and other materials that had been purchased shortly before Teresa's death. The investigation gained traction after detectives received a tip that directed them to Wright. This led to a deeper look into his relationship with Mark, raising suspicions about their possible participation in a murder-for-hire plot. The evidence collected during the arrest was crucial for the trials of both men involved. Initially, Wright denied having any connection to Teresa's murder during police questioning. However, as investigators presented him with evidence, he eventually admitted his involvement. Wright acknowledged that he agreed to carry out the murder for at least $100,000 from Teresa's life insurance policy. In December 2015, Wright accepted a plea deal with prosecutors to avoid a possible capital murder charge. As part of the plea agreement, he confessed to his involvement in the murder and agreed to testify against his co-defendants, Mark Sievers and Jimmy Ray Rogers. In return for his cooperation, he received a 25-year prison sentence for second-degree murder. This deal required him to provide significant assistance to the prosecution in their cases against Mark and Rogers. Wright confessed that he and Rogers traveled from Missouri to Florida with the intention of killing Teresa as part of a plan created by Mark. He revealed that Mark first presented this idea during his wedding in May 2015, citing his financial struggles and the need to eliminate Teresa as a solution. This confession was crucial in proving Mark's direct role in the murder plot. By cooperating with law enforcement, Wright played a key role in the investigation, shedding light on the conspiracy that led to Teresa's tragic death. The investigation uncovered a series of text messages exchanged between Mark and Wright, which clearly outlined their plan to murder Teresa for financial gain and highlighted Mark's direct involvement in organizing the crime. Prosecutors claimed that Mark hired Wright and Rogers to kill Teresa due to financial pressures and fears of losing custody of their daughters. Court documents released during this time revealed serious issues in Mark and Teresa's marriage, such as financial struggles and possible infidelity. The evidence showed that Mark could benefit significantly from Teresa's life insurance policies. On December 4, 2015, shortly after Teresa's funeral, Mark was arrested. He was taken into custody by law enforcement from the Lee County Sheriff's Office. As investigators worked to reconstruct the timeline of events leading up to Teresa's murder, they became confident that they had enough evidence to charge him with first-degree murder. Mark's arrest shifted the case's focus onto him as a key figure in the conspiracy. Initially cooperative with investigators, he started to distance himself as more evidence against him was gathered, resulting in a complicated legal battle. After Mark was arrested, investigators stepped up their efforts to gather more evidence regarding the murder of Dr. Teresa. A key part of this investigation was examining digital evidence, especially GPS data from the rental car. This GPS information provided a detailed record of their route and was essential for creating a timeline of their activities before the murder. The data showed they left Missouri, arriving in Bonita Springs, Florida. Wright even posted a Yelp review for a dumpling restaurant along the way. The GPS device was also linked to an email address belonging to Jimmy Ray Rogers, a close friend of Wright's who had his own criminal record. Surveillance footage from a Florida Walmart showed both men in the area at the time of Teresa's murder. The exact timestamps indicated they reached the Sievers' home around 6 a.m., which matched the timeline of Teresa's murder. Additionally, investigators reviewed cell phone records that showed communication between Mark and Wright. These records revealed regular contact leading up to the murder. The fact that Mark and Wright used prepaid phones indicated they were trying to avoid detection, but investigators managed to trace their communications effectively. This digital evidence was crucial in supporting witness testimonies and clarifying how the murder was plotted and carried out. As trial preparations began, prosecutors focused on assembling a solid case against both Curtis Wainwright, Mark Sievers, and Jimmy Ray Rogers. A key piece of evidence emerged from surveillance footage at a Walmart, where Wright and Rogers were recorded buying items later connected to the murder of Dr. Teresa. The video showed them shopping without attempting to hide their identities while purchasing trash bags, flushable wet wipes, black towels, and a lock-picking kit. These purchases were crucial in proving their intention to commit murder and to dispose of the evidence afterward. Additionally, investigators found fibers from a blue jumpsuit that Rogers had discarded along Highway 47 in Missouri. Forensic analysis showed that these fibers matched those on Teresa's clothing at the crime scene, providing a direct connection between Rogers and the murder. This physical evidence strengthened the prosecution's case by confirming that both men were present during the crime. The prosecution collected digital evidence, including GPS data from the rental car driven by Wright and Rogers, surveillance footage, and forensic findings, built a strong case against the defendants. As the trial dates approached, the prosecution prepared to present this evidence, aiming to prove not only the guilt of Wright and Rogers but also to show Mark's role in planning his wife's murder. After Jimmy Ray Rogers was convicted, Mark Sievers faced trial in December 2019. The prosecution prepared a case that relied significantly on the testimony of Curtis Wayne Wright, who had accepted a plea deal. Wright provided essential information about how Mark orchestrated the murder plot, shedding light on the conspiracy that resulted in Teresa's death. During the trial, prosecutors presented various pieces of evidence linking Mark to the crime. This included text messages exchanged between Mark and Wright that discussed the murder and the financial motivations behind it. The prosecution argued that Mark's desire for financial gain from Teresa's life insurance policies was a primary motive for orchestrating her murder. The defense argued that there was no reliable evidence linking Mark to the murder. They pointed out that the state had only established that Wright and Rogers, not Mark, were responsible for Teresa's death. To weaken Wright's testimony, the defense highlighted his criminal history, which included several felony convictions and mental health issues, such as bipolar disorder. They claimed that Wright had a reason to lie in order to get a lighter sentence for himself. Furthermore, the defense suggested that Wright might have been influenced by law enforcement during his questioning, implying he was just repeating a story given to him by the investigator. They also noted that Wright had not taken a polygraph test, which could have either supported or damaged his credibility as a witness. The defense wrapped up its arguments by asking jurors to doubt the credibility of Wright's statements and to note the absence of direct evidence connecting Mark to the crime. Throughout the trial, jurors were shown consistent forensic evidence, such as fibers from a blue jumpsuit discarded by Rogers that matched those found on Teresa's body. Despite this, the defense continued to argue that Mark was not involved in either planning or carrying out the murder. The prosecution effectively showed that Mark had not only planned the murder but had also enlisted Wright and Rogers to help carry it out. After a brief deliberation of about 4 hours, the jury found Mark Sievers guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. After the verdict, Mark entered the sentencing phase, where jurors would decide on his punishment. This decision depended on whether they identified aggravating factors that justified a death sentence or mitigating circumstances that could lead to a lesser penalty. Mark was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and the sentencing phase began on December 11, 2019, shortly after the verdict was announced. The prosecution aimed to prove two main aggravating factors: that the murder was executed in a cold, calculated, premeditated way, and that it was motivated by financial gain. They presented evidence from the trial, including Wright's testimony about Mark's role in planning the murder and the financial incentives involved. Victim impact statements were also shared to illustrate the emotional effects of Teresa's murder on her family and community. The defense sought to provide evidence that would reduce Mark's culpability by emphasizing his lack of a criminal history and his relationships with his daughters. Family members testified about his role as a father and husband, painting a positive picture of him. However, they struggled to counter the strong evidence put forth by the prosecution. On January 3, 2020, after careful consideration, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for Mark Sievers. They concluded that the evidence showed he had committed the murder with cold, calculated premeditation, although they found insufficient evidence for the claim that he acted for financial gain. During the sentencing hearing, Mark spoke to the court, insisting on his innocence, expressing his love for Teresa and their daughters. He pleaded for mercy, asking to avoid the death penalty. Despite his pleas and the defense's arguments for a lighter sentence, Judge Bruce Kyle sentenced him to death for orchestrating Teresa's murder. The judge highlighted the importance of the jury's recommendation and pointed out that Mark's actions showed a complete disregard for human life. In addition to the death sentence for first-degree murder, he received a 30-year prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, which will be served consecutively. The sentencing phase is complete, and Mark Sievers is now dealing with major legal hurdles as he prepares to appeal his conviction and his sentence. Currently, he is on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Florida while these appeals are underway. After his sentencing, Mark has consistently claimed his innocence, insisting that he did not arrange the murder of his wife, Teresa. Mark remains on death row, but continues to protest the verdict. In February 2025, a judge granted him an evidentiary hearing, which will determine whether he is granted a new trial. The tragic case of Dr. Teresa Sievers is a heartbreaking tale of betrayal and greed, a testament to how love and trust can be corrupted by dark motives. A devoted mother and a talented physician, Teresa became the victim of a murder plot orchestrated by the husband she once trusted. Secrets kept behind closed doors, combined with financial pressures and moral turpitude, led to a tragic end that took the life of a precious human being and left indelible pain for her family, friends, and the Bonita Springs community. The case not only exposed the brutality of the crime, but also served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed and a lack of compassion. While Mark Sievers faces a death sentence and continues to appeal, Teresa's story remains a reminder that justice, even when served, cannot fully undo the damage caused by crime.
As the sun set over Veracruz, Sylvia Jazmín got into her red car after enjoying a relaxing pedicure. She had just shared a warm meal with her mom and hoped to be home for dinner. Everything seemed normal. She parked by a quiet bus terminal, unaware that someone was watching her closely. The evening felt familiar calm. Then, suddenly, something happened. Hours later, Sylvia had vanished. Sylvia Jazmín Armendariz Alpuche was born in 1994 in a city in Veracruz, Mexico. She was the only daughter of Jose, an engineer in the oil industry, and Sylvia Alpuche, a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising her daughter. From a young age, Sylvia excelled academically. Thanks to her family's stable financial situation, she was able to attend a good school and fully embrace the opportunity. In addition to her academic success, Sylvia demonstrated exceptional talent in drawing and public speaking, receiving many awards during her school years. After graduating from high school, she studied industrial engineering in Mexico City. She also had a strong interest in languages. Through her determination and hard work, she became certified in both English and French, which provided her with opportunities that many only dream of. As a young adult, Sylvia gained independence and started her professional career at a large state-owned company in the petroleum and natural gas industry. However, her life wasn't solely about work and ambition. She cherished moments with her family, her close friends, and her 3 dogs. Like many young women, she envisioned getting married and starting a family one day. This dream began to take shape when she met a young man named Aldo. Aldo and Sylvia's life together is not well documented. Some sources indicate they met at work, while others believe it was at a gym. Regardless of the circumstances, they began dating. However, their relationship deteriorated quickly as Aldo became possessive and controlling, which conflicted with Sylvia's independent and determined personality. They eventually broke up between May and June of 2019. Sylvia moved on, concentrating on her personal goals and the life she was creating. On August 14, 2019, everything changed. That morning began just like any other day. Sylvia had breakfast with her mother, and later, they enjoyed lunch together, a tradition they both cherished. This would unknowingly be their last meal together. At around 4:30 p.m., Sylvia left home in her red car for a pedicure appointment downtown. Shortly after, she sent her mother a picture of her freshly painted toenails, assuring her she would be back in time for dinner. However, as night fell, Sylvia did not return home. Her mother became increasingly anxious and tried calling her, but there was no answer. She sent messages to find out if Sylvia's plans had changed. The response she received felt off. It lacked the usual warmth and affection that Sylvia always expressed, filling her with a sense of dread. By the early morning hour, her initial unease had escalated into a full-blown panic. She reached out to her family, hoping that someone might have seen or heard from Sylvia, but no one had. In a last attempt to find answers, she contacted Sylvia's friends, including Andrea, her daughter's closest friend. Andrea, who was also 25 and from Veracruz, had an impressive background like Sylvia's. She had excelled academically and earned a degree in petroleum engineering. Andrea specialized in oil well productivity, held multiple certifications, including one in English, and even started her own business in 2018. She was engaged and in the midst of planning her wedding. Despite their hectic schedules, Andrea and Sylvia remained close friends. Their bond started in preschool and grew stronger throughout high school, making them feel like sisters. On August 15th, Andrea told Sylvia's mother that she had talked to Sylvia the day before, but had not been in touch since. Worried, Sylvia's mother asked Andrea to call Aldo, as she had been blocked by him. Andrea reached out, but Aldo said he hadn't spoken to Sylvia in more than a week. His indifferent response did not help alleviate anyone's worries. As the hours went by without any news from Sylvia, her parents' initial concern turned into deep worry. They ultimately decided to report her missing at the local police station. Shortly after filing the report, the police found Sylvia's red car parked near a bus terminal, but there was no sign of her. Time passed slowly until a call from an oil company worker led to a shocking discovery. While clearing an area near the pipelines, workers noticed human remains discarded in a makeshift dump by Cosoleacaque Nueva Teapa Highway in southern Veracruz. When the police arrived, they found a disturbing scene. The only identifiable remains were two lower legs, clearly belonging to a woman. The rest of the body had been severely burned and was unrecognizable. Investigators only had the legs to identify the victim, so they contacted Sylvia's parents. When her mother saw a photograph of the remains, she instantly recognized them as her daughter's due to the nail design, which matched a photo Sylvia had sent her just hours before she went missing. However, forensic verification was essential. The remains were sent to the medical examiner, and DNA results a few days later confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The body was that of 25-year-old Sylvia. The forensic analysis revealed a horrific scenario. Sylvia had been shot in the head, but the bullet wound alone was not the cause of death. Experts determined that she had died after being set on fire while still alive, wrapped in flammable plastic bags, which explained why her lower legs had not entirely burned. Armed with this disturbing evidence, investigators began to look into Sylvia's social life. During their discussions with family and friends, one name kept coming up: Aldo Castellan, her ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been due to his possessiveness and jealousy, raising immediate concerns. When the police attempted to find Aldo, he had disappeared. His family claimed they did not know his whereabouts. This led to increasing suspicion that he had not simply vanished, but had received assistance to escape. Online speculation surged, filled with alleged sightings and rumors about where he might be. Meanwhile, Sylvia's family prepared for her burial, mourning deeply as they laid her to rest at the local cemetery. Her parents, heartbroken, struggled to comprehend how their lively and accomplished daughter had met such a tragic fate. As the investigation into Aldo escalated, authorities learned troubling details about his background. Just before Sylvia's murder, he had taken a 30-day leave from work. He also deleted all his social media accounts and severed connections with his former friends and acquaintances. His history was alarming. During his time as a student, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and frequently exhibited aggressive behavior. He often arrived at school armed and confronted classmates aggressively. Despite numerous concerns voiced by people at his university, he faced no repercussions, reportedly protected by his father, who was also known for his explosive temper. Further investigation showed that Aldo escaped using an ambulance from the state-owned petroleum company where Sylvia worked. He reportedly received help from an uncle in planning his escape. In response to this elusive and potentially dangerous fugitive, The Attorney General's office announced a reward of 400,000 pesos for any information that could lead to his capture. Meanwhile, Silvia's mother channeled her grief into activism. She organized rallies, distributed flyers featuring Silvia's photo, and demanded justice. Her efforts joined a growing movement of families in Mexico, determined to ensure their daughters' stories are not forgotten. When the global issue began in early 2020, leading to lockdowns and restrictions, Silvia's family and supporters quickly adapted. They utilized social media to organize virtual campaigns and protests, determined to keep her case in the public eye. For several months, there was no progress in the investigation. However, on July 14, 2020, nearly a year after Silvia's death, there was a significant breakthrough. Aldo, now 32, was arrested. Officials attributed his capture to diligent investigative efforts, while media outlets suggested it was a stroke of luck. Police had received an anonymous tip about a man causing a disturbance at a public transport stop. When officers arrived to question him, he brandished a knife but was subdued and identified as the fugitive. Upon confirming his identity, authorities noted that there was an active warrant for his arrest for the femicide of Silvia. While in hiding, Aldo took many steps to avoid being found. He lived in a well-supplied home that helped him stay hidden for several months. He also changed his appearance a lot by gaining weight and growing his hair long. When he was finally questioned, he claimed not to know Silvia, but it didn't take long for his lie to fall apart. Aldo was arrested and moved to a social reintegration center, where he was formally charged with Silvia's murder and with attempting to destroy evidence by burning her remains. Soon after his arrest, his mother shared a letter online declaring her son's innocence. She argued that there was no solid evidence against him and suggested that he was being unfairly targeted simply because he was Silvia's ex-partner. In her statement, she claimed that Aldo had suffered physical abuse at the hands of the police, who she accused of trying to coerce a confession. She also criticized law enforcement for not exploring other potential leads in the case. While she expressed compassion for Silvia's family, she pledged to advocate for what she believes to be the truth about her son. Aldo's mother said her son had gone into hiding for nearly a year because their family was receiving death threats. When Aldo was found, it brought relief to Silvia's family and friends, as many thought the case was close to being resolved and that justice was finally coming. However, just when it seemed closure was within reach, unexpected news changed everything. On December 3, 2020, the police arrested Andrea, Silvia's lifelong best friend, in connection with the crime. This news shocked Silvia's family and the community. Andrea was a key advocate for justice, even providing the crucial voice message in which Silvia identified Aldo as her potential killer. She supported Silvia's mother during protests, allowed her phone to be analyzed for evidence, and was widely recognized as a vital force in maintaining attention on the case. However, authorities accused her of involvement in the crime, stating they had strong evidence against her. Prosecutors reported that several protected witnesses came forward, with one claiming that Andrea had been secretly involved with Aldo while he was with Silvia. These allegations caused distress among those who knew both women. Andrea rejected all accusations, insisting that she had been in a serious relationship with another man she intended to marry before her arrest disrupted those plans. She provided a detailed account of her activities on the day Silvia went missing. She claimed she had visited a spa, forgot her wallet, and called her mother to bring it to her. Her mother confirmed that they returned home together around 8:30 p.m. However, cell tower data contradicted their story. Analysis of the phones belonging to Silvia, Aldo, and Andrea showed that all three were at the same location around the time the crime likely happened. This discovery led to new protests, this time initiated by Andrea's parents, who argued that their daughter was being wrongly accused for not testifying against Aldo. By early 2021, Aldo and Andrea started sharing their perspectives on the situation through letters and social media posts from their detention centers. In one handwritten note, Andrea expressed her gratitude to those supporting her and her family. She hoped that the prosecution would take a closer look at the evidence and reconsider the possibility of a mistake. Meanwhile, Andrea's parents initiated a social media campaign to share photos, documents, and her side of the story. They also called for the anonymous witnesses who accused her to be revealed, arguing that transparency is crucial for ensuring a fair trial. Despite their efforts, the outcome remained unchanged. In September 2022, after a long and emotionally intense trial, 27-year-old Andrea was found guilty of murdering Sylvia and sentenced to 70 years in prison. The judge referred to the so-called overwhelming evidence, especially the geolocation data from Andrea's phone, which showed she was at the crime scene during the crucial time. For Sylvia's parents, the verdict provided some legal closure, but it did not bring peace. Meanwhile, for Andrea's family, this verdict marked the start of a new struggle, one against a sentence they believe was based on flawed evidence. Andrea's defense attorney criticized both the prosecution and the judge, arguing that the trial was affected by inconsistencies and weak evidence. From the defense's viewpoint, Andrea was condemned not for any proven involvement in the crime, but for her refusal to testify against Aldo. Although she knew about the violent relationship between Sylvia and Aldo, Andrea had never seen the crime occur and lacked concrete proof to blame anyone. Her mother publicly condemned what she called a flawed investigation, highlighting that, even though 4 alleged eyewitnesses came forward a year after the crime, none had actually witnessed the event take place. There was no solid proof of a romantic relationship between Andrea and Aldo, which prosecutors used to suggest they were involved together. The main issue was the cell phone geolocation data. Prosecutors argued that this data placed Andrea at the crime scene and claimed it came from her phone. Meanwhile, the lawyer argued that Andrea was being unfairly blamed, serving as a convenient scapegoat for a public demanding justice. After the investigators struggled to create a solid case against Aldo, they shifted their focus to Andrea, perhaps to avoid confronting their shortcomings. In November 2022, Andrea's legal team filed an appeal with the Superior Court, seeking to have her conviction overturned. They also requested an investigation into possible abuses of power and political interference, highlighting actions by the then governor of Veracruz. Andrea's family was hopeful that the higher court would act fairly and give her a chance to demonstrate her innocence. After nearly 2 years, Andrea achieved a significant breakthrough. She was granted a federal writ of protection, a legal order from the federal courts. The court determined that her trial had serious procedural issues. The federal court has ordered a new trial, which allows previously withheld evidence to be presented. This decision gives Andrea a fresh opportunity to prove her innocence and possibly regain her freedom. The most recent development in Andrea's case took place on April 21, 2025, during an important hearing. Her mother reported that the new defense team introduced verified geolocation data connected to Andrea's actual phone evidence that had inexplicably been left out during her first trial. This data challenges the prosecution's claims and could undermine the basis of the original conviction. However, as of May 2025, Andrea's release had not been officially decided. At the same time, Aldo's legal proceedings were facing significant delays, and official records showed that his trial had not yet started. Despite several requests from his defense team for house arrest, a judge upheld his preventive detention in 2024. By March 2025, Sylvia's mother, along with friends and supporters, organized a protest calling for Aldo to be put on trial. During the protest, she raised concerns about why the accused had not yet faced justice while in custody. The prosecutor's office provided vague explanations, mentioning that procedural delays were due to ongoing legal appeals. Sylvia's case has become emblematic of the fight for justice in a country plagued by gender-based violence, which continues to affect many lives. What originally seemed to be a closed case has now raised serious issues about due process, corruption, and the impact of delayed justice. The ongoing debate questions whether Andrea was truly involved in her friend's murder or if she is an innocent victim caught in a broken legal system. Should Andrea be released? She is innocent or guilty. A young woman was on her way home after spending a night out with friends, but she never arrived. Jessica Lynn Callagher was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas, where she lived with her parents and 2 brothers. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easily made friends. Beyond her sociable nature, she was very ambitious, had a clear goal since high school. She wanted to become a teacher. To achieve this, she enrolled at Texas State University and earned her bachelor's degree in science. Jessica then decided to pursue a master's degree while working as a teaching assistant at an elementary school and taking a part-time job at a grocery store. Despite her busy schedule, she maintained a positive attitude, believing that her hard work would eventually lead to success. On September 7, 2009, Jessica had a day off. She spent it with her friends and cousin, Melanie. They began the day by lounging at the pool and went out for dinner. Afterwards, they visited a bar to play pool. At the end of the night, Jessica became the designated driver, ensuring everyone got home safely. She dropped off Melanie last, around 1:30 in the morning. Melanie invited Jessica to stay over, but Jessica declined since she had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop at a 24-hour shop to buy food for her dogs. After saying goodbye to her cousin, she left. A few hours later, as morning arrived, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. She learned that Jessica had missed her shift, which was unusual since Jessica never skipped work without a valid reason. At that time, Jessica had been promoted to store manager, adding to her responsibilities. Weren't worried, Melanie called O'Leary's several friends, but none had heard from Jessica that morning. She then contacted her brother, John Ridenour, who lived with Jessica. John told Melanie he hadn't seen her either. John, a police officer, had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. and hadn't noticed if Jessica had come home during the night. He also hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he quickly returned home. But Jessica was still missing. It seemed she hadn't been home at all, as her dogs were acting unusually, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. This raised alarm bells. Something was definitely wrong. John quickly contacted his colleagues at the police department to track Jessica's phone. The signal led them to a restaurant near her home. Melanie and her boyfriend hurried to the restaurant and soon found Jessica's car in the parking lot. However, when they approached and opened the door, they were horrified to see that Jessica was slumped in the driver's seat, unresponsive. Her skin was badly sunburned, and the inside of the car was extremely hot. Melanie's boyfriend immediately called the police, who sent officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was taken for further investigation. It was evident that she had likely been attacked. Investigators started looking into Jessica's car. They quickly noticed that the driver's seat was pushed too far back. Given the injuries she had, detectives believed she might have been attacked while still in the car. They also found that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, there was a bag of dog food, indicating that Jessica had been in the car since the night before, as she intended to go to the store right after dropping off her cousin. After searching the car thoroughly, detectives entered the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car was found. This is when the investigation took an unexpected twist. One of the restaurant employees informed the investigators that when she arrived for work early that morning, she saw Jessica's car and noticed that Jessica was still alive at that time. The witness reported that Jessica was sitting inside her car, completely undressed and behaving oddly, as if she were under the influence. Although the scene was unusual, the employee didn't dwell on it and went inside to begin her shift. Shortly after, she stepped outside again and saw Jessica sitting by her car. Jessica had put her clothes back on but was still acting strangely, just sitting there and running her hands through her hair. When the employee went outside a third time, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making odd hand gestures. The police later discovered several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning. Despite her unusual behavior, no one called for help or checked on her well-being. After interviewing the witnesses, detectives returned to Melanie and asked if Jessica might have been drinking alcohol or taking banned substance. Melanie firmly stated that Jessica had been sober that night, as she was the designated driver responsible for getting everyone home safely and had work the next day. She also claimed that Jessica had never used banned substance. The situation puzzled the investigators, but they later uncovered a possible explanation. Medical examiners discovered signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, including marks from hands and a likely rope or belt. She also had numerous bruises, scratches, and she had been abuse assaulted. Experts noted that her trauma could have resulted in a brain injury, which was worsened by the hours she spent inside a hot car in the sun. This might clarify her unusual behavior, her disorientation, and why she didn't call for help. It is likely that Jessica was so affected that she didn't understand what was happening to her, eventually leading to death. Toxicology reports confirm Melanie's earlier statement. Jessica had no alcohol or banned substance in her system. If any of the witnesses had called for medical assistance, doctors might have been able to save her, but it was now too late. Detectives needed to determine who was responsible for her death. They began by searching for CCTV footage, but unfortunately, there were no cameras in the parking lot where Jessica was found. However, they made an important discovery. If she had bought dog food late at night, it was likely that she stopped at the 24-hour Walmart across the street. The detectives obtained the store's security footage, which showed Jessica arriving, walking into the store alone, and there were no indications that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, picked up a large bag, and proceeded to the checkout. Everything appeared normal, but as she exited the store, detectives observed something noteworthy. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Detectives reviewed more footage and noted that the man arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the parking lot, entered the store, but instead of shopping, he went straight to the restroom and then left. When detectives checked the entrance camera, they saw him following closely behind Jessica and appearing to be in a hurry. However, there was an issue. Jessica's car was parked behind a large tree, which blocked the camera's view. Despite this, the footage allowed them to track the man's movements. He approached Jessica's car, went behind the tree, and did not emerge again. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car exited the parking lot. A surveillance camera later recorded a vehicle arriving at the restaurant parking lot where Jessica was discovered the next morning. Shortly after, an individual got out of Jessica's car and walked across the lot toward the parking area of Walmart. This individual then got into the same vehicle that a suspicious man had driven earlier. Detectives were nearly certain that this person was involved in Jessica's murder, but the quality of the surveillance footage made it difficult to identify him or his vehicle clearly. However, the detectives still had some options. With Jessica's credit cards missing, they examined her accounts for any recent transactions and discovered a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station approximately 20 minutes after her car was left at the restaurant. They obtained the gas station's surveillance footage and quickly recognized the red pickup truck associated with their suspect. When they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was indeed the same man. This provided proof that he had Jessica's credit card, making him appear even more guilty. The detectives then released the footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, seeking help from the public for any information about him. Detectives continued their search for more evidence, but found no new leads. Days went by without any significant developments until they received a call from a woman. She claimed that the man in the security footage resembled her fiancé's best friend, Crispin Harmel. She also mentioned that Crispin was expected to visit that evening to repay some money he owed, but he never arrived. After seeing the news report about Jessica's murder, she recognized him in the surveillance video. Although she was shocked to think he could be involved in such a terrible crime, she understood that she needed to inform the police. Detectives started investigating Crispin's background and soon found a significant detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had stopped him for driving with an expired license. When the investigators examined the officer's body camera footage, they noticed that Crispin closely matched the description of their suspect. Moreover, he was wearing the same baseball cap as the person in the surveillance video. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police visited Crispin's home. They immediately noticed his pickup truck, which was the same model as the one captured on surveillance footage. However, there were some changes. The chrome details visible in the video had been painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them by quickly admitting that he had met Jessica that night. He explained that they connected through an adult website and arranged to meet for a casual hookup. Crispin said they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. He claimed she drove them to a park, where they had intimate before returning to Walmart. Before parting ways, they talked in her car, during which he mentioned his financial struggles. According to him, Jessica then gave him her credit card so he could buy gas. After saying their goodbyes, they went their separate ways. The next day, after seeing news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin panicked and feared he might be accused. He disposed of her credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Although Crispin recounted his story confidently, detectives recognized it as a lie, viewing it as a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. The surveillance footage contradicted his account. He claimed they had planned to meet in the Walmart parking lot, but he only approached Jessica after she had returned to her car. He also said she drove him back after their supposed meeting, but the footage clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car remained in the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else interacted with it. Detectives collected Crispin's phone and computer, as well as Jessica's devices, because they suspected there was no evidence of communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never visited the adult website that Crispin claimed they used to arrange their meeting. However, when investigators examined Crispin's computer, they discovered something noteworthy. Just hours after the police found Jessica's body, he searched for and read several news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family also doubted Crispin's story. They believed she would never seek a one-night stand or meet a stranger in a parking lot at night. That behavior was simply not in her character. Additionally, she had told a friend that she needed to rest before her morning shift and still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for a secret late-night date. Investigators thought that Crispin was trying to shift the blame onto others. However, the overwhelming evidence against him made it difficult for him to create a credible excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Crispin probably saw Jessica inside Walmart and decided to target her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to prevent her from crying out or resisting. It seems he then forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he abused her. Afterward, he returned to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and took her wallet and credit cards. When the police confronted Crispin about the incident, he stopped answering questions and requested a lawyer. Despite there being strong evidence against him, investigators faced a significant challenge that could jeopardize the entire case. Jessica had survived for several hours after the attack, which posed a major legal issue. The problem was that medical experts could not definitively explain why this occurred. Cases like hers were so rare that they had not been thoroughly studied. While the official cause of death was identified as strangulation, there had never been a documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours, and then dying later as a direct result of the attack. The only way to solidify the case would be a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to any wrongdoing. Detectives faced a challenging situation. They believed that Crispin was guilty of Jessica's murder, as no one else could have committed the crime. However, since Jessica had survived until the morning after the attack, there was a significant concern that the case might not hold up in court. To bolster their case, investigators examined Jessica's car for more evidence, but found nothing. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no other evidence linking Crispin to the crime scene. Prosecutors discovered a temporary way to proceed. They charged Crispin with evidence tampering linked to Jessica's case. Crispin had confessed to disposing of her credit card and repainting his truck, which were obvious attempts to conceal his actions. They had his own admissions as evidence. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and received a 10-year prison sentence for evidence tampering. Detectives were committed to achieving justice for Jessica and refused to give up. They needed strong scientific evidence to link Crispin to her murder. For years, their efforts led to no significant breakthroughs. Then in 2013, they found a scientific article that changed the course of the investigation. The article discussed cases in which strangulation did not immediately cause death, but instead resulted in a condition called delayed death syndrome. This syndrome can lead to brain damage, causing victims to feel confused, disoriented, and unable to seek help. The article's findings closely aligned with Jessica's behavior following the attack and reinforced the initial medical examiner's belief that she had suffered a brain injury, leaving her unaware of her situation until it was too late. Detectives contacted the author of this article right away and began constructing a murder case against Crispin, using advanced medical sciences support. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he still maintained his innocence throughout the process. During the trial, his defense attorney emphasized a critical point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution contended that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her assailant, which should have left DNA traces under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution highlighted an important detail. Jessica had been trapped in her car for hours in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA breaks down quickly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have completely degraded and been unrecoverable. Prosecutors built their case against Crispin using strong forensic evidence and extensive surveillance footage that strongly indicated his guilt. However, a complication arose when Crispin's lawyer challenged the accuracy of the timestamps on the video evidence. Initially, the footage obtained from the security cameras did not have any timestamps. Since the timing of events was critical, prosecutors applied specialized software to add timestamps later, which gave the defense a chance to question the integrity of the evidence. Crispin's attorney contended that this was a significant issue because he had not received the original footage with the timestamps included. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, resulting in a mistrial. Consequently, Crispin avoided conviction due to this technicality. Nevertheless, he remained in prison, serving his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Prosecutors quickly started preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team worked diligently to stop the retrial, arguing that it would violate his rights. Ultimately, however, a higher court decided in favor of the prosecution, allowing the trial to proceed. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution meticulously addressed every aspect of the case, ensuring the defense couldn't take advantage of any loopholes. They successfully convinced the jury of Crispin's guilt, resulting in his conviction for murder. Crispin Harmel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, believing it might jeopardize their chances of a guilty verdict. They were aware that the delayed death syndrome argument could create doubts for the jurors, and in death penalty cases, a conviction requires complete certainty. A few years later, Crispin attempted to appeal his sentence, but his request was turned down. Consequently, he is still in prison with very little chance of being released. Jessica's family expressed gratitude to the investigators and prosecutors for their unwavering commitment to seeking justice, even though it took 9 years to achieve a verdict. However, they also shared that they had hoped the sentencing would provide them with some relief and closure. But ultimately, no punishment for Crispin could ever really alleviate their suffering. A girl set out from her home to visit a friend but never arrived. Initially, the police found no clues, and the case went cold. For years, it seemed that the answer was just out of reach, and no one could solve the mystery. Decades later, everything changed when the truth emerged in an unexpected way. Claire Tiltman was born on January 14, 1977, in the small British village of Greenhithe. As an only child, she attended an all-girls school where she made many friends. From a young age, Claire was focused and determined. She aspired to be one of the first female firefighters in the country. During high school, she volunteered at charity events organized by the local fire department, offering her assistance in any way possible. However, she was also committed to earning a college degree before pursuing her dream career. In January 1993, when Claire was 16 years old, she was busy with her final exams and considering her future education. On January 18th, just 4 days after her birthday, she went to a friend's house to discuss college options and potential applications. Claire left home around 6 p.m., informing her mom that she would return in about an hour and a half. However, when that time passed, Claire still had not come back. Initially, Claire's mom suspected that she had simply lost track of time and might have stayed longer at her friend's house. However, when it was past 8 p.m., her concern grew. She called Claire's friend's house, only to learn that Claire had never arrived. Believing that plans might have changed, she began calling some of Claire's other friends, but nobody had seen her that evening. A few minutes later, Claire's mom went outside and encountered a neighbor who informed her about an incident a few miles away. The area had ambulances and numerous police cars. Feeling anxious at the time, Claire's mom went directly to the local police station to report her daughter missing. She gave them a detailed description of Claire, but instead of taking her report, the officers asked her to return home. They mentioned that there had been an incident and that someone would come by shortly to explain the situation. A short time later, police arrived at her door with devastating news that no parent ever wants to hear. Her daughter had been found dead just hours earlier. That evening, two men were driving along a road connecting nearby towns when they noticed a girl kneeling by the roadside. Concerned, they stopped to check on her. As they got closer, they realized something was seriously wrong. She was struggling to breathe and appeared to be unresponsive. One man quickly ran to a nearby pub to call for help while the other stayed with her. Initially, he thought she might have been hit by a car since she was so close to the road. He tried to comfort her, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Within minutes, she stopped breathing entirely, and when paramedics arrived, it was already too late. Her body was taken to the medical examiner, and the findings were shocking. She had been stabbed 9 times, likely with a large knife, but there were no signs of abuse. Meanwhile, the police started investigating the crime scene and quickly identified where the attack had occurred. Claire was probably ambushed in a narrow alleyway off the main road leading to her friend's house. The nature of her injuries suggested that the attacker approached her from behind. However, there was little else to help the investigation. The alley was quiet, dark, and deserted. There were no security cameras, witnesses, or helpful evidence. One crucial detail stood out. The medical examiner noted the murder weapon was unusually large, too big to be carried casually in a pocket. Detectives suspected that the killer had brought the knife from home, indicating a premeditated plan to use it. News of the murder quickly spread through Claire's village and neighboring towns. That evening, some students were still at school studying for exams when they heard the news on the radio. Initially, the victim's identity was unknown, but it wasn't long before rumors circulated. With no strong leads in the investigation, the police sought help from the public. A few people came forward claiming to have seen a man in a light-colored coat near the road around 7 p.m. Another witness reported seeing a man with dark, curly hair leaving an alleyway, but neither individual could be identified, despite the tight-knit nature of the community. Detectives suspected that the attacker might have had a personal connection to Claire, which could explain the motive. However, they also considered a more alarming possibility that this incident could be part of a pattern, indicating that they might be dealing with a serial offender. In December 1988, 4 years before Claire was murdered, a 27-year-old woman was attacked by an unknown assailant while walking home from work. He was armed with a gun and a knife, abducted her, and drove to a remote area where he attempted to assault her. After stabbing her 5 times, he left her, believing she was dead. Miraculously, she survived. Despite her severe injuries and the freezing temperatures, she crawled to a nearby road, where a group of workers found her. She spent 9 days in intensive care, and doctors successfully saved her life. However, the police were never able to identify or capture her attacker. After Claire was murdered, detectives and local residents started to suspect that the same individual might be responsible for both crimes. A few days later, Claire's funeral took place, drawing hundreds of people from the community. Prior to the funeral, her parents spoke to reporters and mentioned that they feared the killer might attend the service. The detectives shared this concern, so they were present at the funeral and carefully noted everyone who attended. However, this effort still did not lead them to the person responsible for her murder. In the weeks that followed, the police continued to question local residents and investigate leads, but they did not find any useful information. Over 2 years passed, and it began to feel like the case would remain unsolved. Gradually, as people stopped discussing what happened to Claire, until one day, everything changed. On October 17, 1995, a local woman was returning home from work when a man attacked her just a few hundred yards from where Claire had been stabbed. The attacker used a knife. When the woman fell and screamed, he fled the scene. Fortunately, she survived despite her injuries. However, detectives faced challenges since the attacker approached her from behind, so she couldn't describe his face or any specific features. Luckily, a witness stepped forward and reported seeing a white Ford Capri nearby. This information allowed investigators to quickly identify the car's owner, a local milkman named Colin. Police remembered that they had previously spoken to Colin right after Claire's murder. He had called them to report seeing a man with dark hair near the crime scene. However, when detectives met with him a few weeks later, his story had changed slightly. Initially, Colin said he was driving on that road around 6:30 p.m., but now he insisted it was closer to 5:30 p.m. Nevertheless, he had an alibi. His mother told the police that they had been driving together and were already home when Claire was attacked. Detectives had more reasons to be suspicious of Colin. He drove a white Ford Capri, which witnesses had also spotted near another attack. Colin was known for wearing a light-colored trench coat, matching the description given by several witnesses from both crime scenes. He also had light-colored hair, and 2 different people reported seeing a fair-haired man near the alley where Claire was murdered. These factors led detectives to seriously consider him as a suspect and to obtain a warrant to search his home. Police discovered a large knife in the house that matched the wounds of the latest victim. However, that was just the start of their findings. They also found a hidden journal, which contained shocking revelations. In the diary, Colin confessed to attacking a woman in 1988, referring to it as his masterpiece, and claiming it had a 95% success rate. When he learned that the victim had survived, he expressed a desire to do better next time. Additionally, he mentioned an attempt to sneak into a care home to kill someone, but stated that the plan failed. Colin Ash Smith shared some unsettling experiences from his past. He revealed that he admitted to threatening his first victim, warning her that if she reported him to the police, he would harm someone else. Additionally, Colin confessed to a stabbing incident in 1995. He was angry with his girlfriend, believing she was unfaithful. In his rage, he drove around looking for someone to hurt. Initially, he saw a man but thought that would be too risky. Later, he noticed a woman walking alone, stopped his car, and attacked her. Afterward, he felt a sense of relief and was indifferent about the woman's fate. The diary revealed his intentions to commit additional murders and mentioned that he had broken into the homes of several women he knew while they were away. When police examined Colin's car, they discovered blood-stained clothes and a torn piece of a tie, which he had used in an attempt to strangle his first victim. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with attacks on both women. Detectives also believed he was responsible for Claire's murder and began investigating for any possible connections. Colin's family was familiar with Claire's family. They both frequented the same community center, a social hub for residents. Remarkably, Claire had celebrated her birthday at that center just 4 days before her death, and Colin had been there the same night. Investigators also noted that Colin attended her funeral. However, despite these connections, there was no concrete evidence linking him to her murder. While Colin was in jail, detectives interrogated him, but he denied any involvement. He did present a theory, suggesting that the killer could be a man who used to play pool with Claire at the community center. Colin claimed that this man left town soon after the murder and that he last saw him at Claire's funeral. Police were able to locate the man, but he did not match any of the witness descriptions of someone seen near the crime scene. In contrast, Colin fit the descriptions perfectly, but the police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Colin was ultimately charged only for the 2 attacks that occurred in 1988 and 1995. In December 1996, he pleaded guilty and received life sentences, with the chance of parole after 15 years. However, investigators continued their pursuit of justice for Claire, seeking any evidence that could strengthen their case against him. Among all the possible suspects, Colin remained the most likely, but there were significant challenges: a lack of physical evidence and his alibi. Colin called the police the day after the murder, claiming he saw a man with dark hair near the scene about an hour later. However, this call contradicted his own alibi because, according to his account, he would have had to be very close to the alley when Claire was attacked. This raised suspicions among detectives. Was his mother lying to protect him, Detectives continued their investigation and eventually revealed the truth. Colin's alibi was entirely fabricated. They found concrete evidence showing that his mother was not with him that evening, indicating that she had lied to protect him. In addition to this, investigators made another unsettling discovery. They learned that Colin's father had disposed of a knife that Colin had brought home after the 1995 attack. He confessed to boiling the knife, taking it apart, and throwing away the pieces just hours before police arrived with a search warrant. As a result, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Colin's mother was also involved. She later gave an interview to a local TV station where she claimed it was her idea for her husband to dispose of the knife. She insisted that she believed her son was innocent and was afraid that the police would wrongfully accuse him of someone else's crime. Despite their extensive investigation, police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge Colin with Claire's murder. While he served time for other attacks, detectives continued to explore his background in hopes of finding a connection to the crime, but they came up empty-handed. The only notable find occurred during a routine search of his prison cell, where officers discovered disturbing notes filled with graphic fantasies about women he knew. These notes resembled pages from his old diary and painted a troubling picture of his mindset. After that, the investigation stalled. Claire's parents believed Colin was the murderer, and it weighed heavily on them that the police couldn't charge him. Sadly, Claire's mother died of cancer in 2008, and her father passed away in 2012, so neither lived to see justice for their daughter. In 2013, the case gained public attention again as detectives renewed their efforts to identify the killer. They reached out to the public for any information, and even the Prime Minister supported their appeal. Although many tips came in, none were helpful until a former cellmate of Colin's, Stéphane Dubois, stepped forward with new information. He claimed that Colin had bragged about attacking a girl one day. According to him, Colin recounted seeing her at a crosswalk and described how he suddenly lost control. Detectives quickly noticed an important detail. Claire had been using a crosswalk that led directly into the alley where she was attacked. In contrast, the other two victims had been found far from any crosswalks. This clue strongly indicated that Colin might have been referring to Claire or possibly another victim that the police had not yet identified. However, detectives were skeptical about the existence of other victims since there were no similar unsolved cases reported in the area. Detectives did not have enough evidence to prove guilt yet, but they decided it was time to present all their findings and attempt to take the case to trial. Meanwhile, a new law in the UK was enacted, allowing prosecutors to introduce a suspect's previous convictions in court. This could significantly impact Claire's case. Colin was already serving a sentence for 2 violent attacks that were strikingly similar to Claire's case and occurred only a short distance from where she was killed. Additionally, investigators had testimony from Stéphane and solid evidence that Colin's alibi was fabricated. With this information, prosecutors felt they had enough to proceed. On February 12, 2014, detectives announced that Colin had officially been charged with Claire's murder. This was significant timing, as it coincided with his first scheduled parole hearing. Instead of being released, he remained in jail while prosecutors prepared for trial. During the proceedings, he revealed even more unsettling information. He disclosed that he began sneaking out of his house at night when he was about 19 or 20 years old, taking a knife with him and roaming the streets, looking for someone to kill. Colin expressed that for him, it was about feeling powerful and having control over others. As he didn't want to appear weak, his ex-girlfriend testified that Colin started behaving unusually right after Claire was murdered. Initially, she thought he was just as shaken as everyone else in town, but later realized there was more going on. When asked about his feelings toward women, Colin admitted he both loved and hated them. He acknowledged that he struggled with low self-esteem and often felt worthless, which made it difficult for him to trust anyone, especially women. He also mentioned that he owned a collection of 20 to 30 knives at home, along with a crossbow and several air rifles, and his parents were aware of his collection. Additionally, Colin confessed that he never left the house without carrying a knife. When Stéphane was called to testify, the prosecution faced an unexpected problem. Stéphane stated that he could not clearly remember what Colin had said to him, and acknowledged that he might have mixed up the conversation with someone else. The trial lasted 5 weeks, and on December 11, 2014, the jury found Colin guilty of murdering Claire Tiltman. He received a life sentence in prison, with the chance for parole after 21 years. When the verdict was announced, Colin showed no emotion. He later appealed the decision, but the court turned it down, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. After 26 long years, justice was finally served. Following his conviction, detectives branded Ash Smith absolutely evil and said he should never be released. Jaswant Narwal, chief prosecutor for CPS Southeast, called the case one of the most complex that CPS Southeast has dealt with in recent years. In November 2015, Ash Smith appealed against his conviction on the grounds that Judge Sweeney was wrong to allow seriously harmful material to be put before the jury. However, the appeal was dismissed by Judge Davis and 2 other judges of appeal. He is currently being held at HMP Durham. In honor of Claire, local officials first named a road after her, and later they renamed a street using her last name. In 2022, a new community center was opened, proudly named after Claire Tiltman. Claire Tiltman's tragic murder left an indelible mark on Greenhithe, but her legacy endures through the community's unwavering pursuit of justice and the tributes that honor her vibrant spirit. After 26 years, Colin Ash Smith's conviction brought closure to a case that once seemed unsolvable, underscoring the resilience of Kent police and the impact of new legal measures. While Claire's parents did not live to see this resolution, her memory lives on in the road, street, and community center named after her, inspiring future generations to embody her determination and kindness. The case stands as a testament to the power of perseverance, ensuring that Claire's light continues to shine brightly in the hearts of those who knew her and beyond.